Mike, I'm just checking. Let me know when we're ready to go. Oh, all right. So we are live. I'm sorry, my misunderstanding in communication. Welcome, everybody. We are starting our meeting tonight, and we will start with the roll call. I'm Christine Chu.
Francine Wiest.
Whoops, Carolyn Watson.
Erica Malif.
Seema Sarasan.
And oh, is our superintendent here? Our superintendent will be joining in a minute or two. He's just finishing up a meeting with a bunch of other superintendents on reopening. So we will have him, but I believe that we have Eva Collins and Melissa DeVita, our deputy superintendents, are both here.
Yes,
so
I'm here.
Thanks, Eva.
And I'm here. This is Melissa.
Thank you. All right, so that brings us to the pledge. Jen, do you want to take us through?
Okay, I've got my mic unmuted. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Perfect, thank you. And then in approving the agenda, I would like to note that item 8 on the board business is likely to take on the order of 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 15 at most, not 30. We are not doing a full first reading, we're doing a pre-reading. So we'll get some time back there if needed. And I suspect we have a lot to think about in the early part of this meeting. Are there any concerns about the agenda at this point? Okay, then the agenda is approved as written. Any questions or call outs from the consent agenda?
There we go. Not muted. I had one. I had emailed to ask about the. I can't look at both this and the document. Teachers identified opting out of endorsement. And I had a question about how much we were expecting that to expand with the chaos of potential remote learning and whether we'd get it earlier. And Jeff wrote back and said that we would be getting the list earlier this year, probably in the fall. And they are taking steps to make sure that everything is as it should be. So just a comment.
Thank you for calling that out. That's something that we don't often talk about. Is there anything, Ivan, or Eva, is there somebody that wants to just explain why we end up with teachers out of endorsement and just make that clear for everybody, like what that process is about?
Yes, I'll call on Jeff Thomas. Jeff, can you explain about the out of endorsement and that process, please?
I sure can. What we are required to do every year is to take a look at teacher endorsement and classes that they actually teach. And per OSPI, they actually have become much more specific about each individual class that a teacher teaches and to make sure certification is there. The biggest change happened in last year in the tracking mechanism that OSPI has developed, which now allows districts to do that. But the original implementation had quite a few technical challenges that took many months to get through. We now are through them. So going into this next year, we should be much earlier in identifying that. And also each of those teachers, we've developed a plan or a strategy on what we're going to do to get them either aligned with endorsement or shift their teaching assignment.
Thank you. Oh, Carolyn, do you have something on the consent agenda?
So my understanding from reading the cover memo is that I felt like I'd never seen this particular list before, and it seems like there may have been a reason because it was hard to generate. But yeah.
Two reasons. One, a couple of years ago, OSPI actually tightened what it meant to be out of endorsement, and the technical tool that we were using was not ready until this year. But the rule change was actually a couple of years ago.
Well, it was interesting to see. I just wondered why I hadn't seen it before, but I think
Yeah,
that
this is
explains
the
it.
first time the board has seen it.
Okay, yeah. And then the other question for the consent agenda was just about, do we have a list of teachers who aren't coming back in the fall, as just we normally have the resignations and stuff. Do we think that we're going to get a whoosh of resignations if people have to teach in person?
In my opinion, I think it's premature to look at that. What I believe we will most likely get is potentially a request for leaves of absence.
Mm-hmm.
Employees who are contemplating retirement may be considering that. But we're really trying to be extremely flexible to match each individual employee's situation with where we're staffing. And we still at this point have a lot of moving parts. So we're going to be frantically working on this the next month.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're under more community scrutiny, which is why I asked that question, because I had a community member pull that list and try to cross-reference it to the same month last year. And so people are really, really paying attention in ways that they weren't.
Yeah, and this is an atypical personnel year. There's just no other way to describe it.
Wow.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
So just bottom line question to just follow up on Carolyn's to make clear. Do we have at this point, Jeff, any sort of deficit in teachers or staffing that are available to do work? Not getting into the details, just in general, do we have any overall staffing shortages that we're having to address yet at this point?
Not that I'm aware of. In fact, we were working on hiring as we speak, and the market actually seems to be pretty good right now in terms of applicants. So we're not seeing that.
Great, thank you. Francine, Seema, are there any questions or issues on the consent agenda?
I had some comments on the finance and budgeting report, but since we are discussing the budget later in the meeting, they can be held to that. And just the bottom line would be that Financial and Operations Committee did review a lot of the material, and it's set to go for this portion on the consent agenda, and then we'll talk more under the budgeting discussion.
Okay, thank you for that. We will look forward to the details in a little while. Can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Thanks, Erica. Can I get a second?
Okay, I'll second.
Thanks, Carolyn. All right. Is there any, we'll do this as we've been doing things online. Is there any opposition to approving the consent agenda? Is there any opposition to passing the consent agenda and approving? Okay, the consent agenda is approved. That takes us to a construction change order. Jack, do you want to tell us about Newport High School's stadium?
Yes, on July 1st, 2020, bids were opened for the Newport High School Stadium Storage Facility project. There were 3 responsive bidders. The apparent low bidder was Spee West Construction with a base bid of $325,000. The cost estimate for the project was $292,106. Spee has done successful work for the district, currently on Highland Middle School, Sammamish High School, and a number of other projects. And we are recommending a contract for construction for the Newport High School Stadium Storage Facility project be awarded to Spee West Construction in the amount of $325,000.
Any questions for Jack about this?
Yeah, a quick question, Jack. Where does the estimate of 292 come from?
It was from the architects and the engineers.
And do you feel that the difference between
yes,
the
because the other 2 responsive bidders, one was $405,000 and another one was almost $444,000. So again, a lot of it, you know, it's really kind of tough to figure out exactly where things are going right now in this market, and so you know, an estimate is a thing to work with, but it's, you know, not necessarily a hard and fast number. So we were comfortable with that amount. And again, you know, sometimes the estimates are a little bit of a, you know, kind of a crystal ball look at it as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Jack? It sounds like that you felt like because that lower one was in line with your estimate, and they weren't underestimating the project because they had done successful projects for us in the past, so have some kind of realistic sense of what we're going to ask for, and we're not going to get a ton of change orders on it that'll take the bid up to where the other ones were or anything like that.
That's correct.
Great. So any other questions for Jack? Okay, to be efficient, I'm going to motion that we approve the construction change order from Newport High School Stadium Storage Facility contract.
Second.
Okay, anyone opposed? Anyone opposed? Okay, that is approved. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and just to be clear, I think I called it a change order because it's in the change order category, but it's actually a contract that we just approved. So that takes us to the next section of goals and annual plan. And I forget why we've got annual plan first instead of return to school plan. I know they're interdependent. I would be inclined to start with the return to school plan unless there were a compelling reason. So Ivan, tell us where we're going here. We've got about 2 hours dedicated to the combined conversation about what's our plan for next year, how are we returning to school and looking at that. Can you just remind me why we put annual plan before return to school? Or maybe we don't need to keep that.
I don't know that Ivan is on yet.
Oh, okay. Thank
you.
I'm just popping on right now.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
I just was going to say that I think the annual plan gives us a little bit of a look backward in terms of where we've been, and a reminder about our strategic plan and overall what we're working to accomplish for kids. And so it might help set the context for the return to school, but I do think we could do either one. It doesn't matter to me. It's just the annual plan might set a little bit of a context of our strategic plan for us.
Part of the reason I'm asking Eva is that we have a couple hours dedicated to talking more deeply about the annual plan in the workshop, the board development workshop on Thursday, but we don't have the dedicated time for the return to school plan. So I don't want the board to run out of time to ask questions about return to school plan because of annual plan when we have more time for one and not the other.
Right.
So
anticipating that, we have made our part of the presentation about 10 minutes for the annual plan, recognizing that you're not going to approve this annual plan until sometime in August. And so we just wanted to pull out a few things to highlight, and then we can set it aside. And if you want, we could bookend it. We could do this little bit, and then if you wanted to, you could wait and ask questions after the return to school.
Yeah, why don't we do that? Why don't we do the two presentations? Why don't we do the two presentations in a row, and then we can do the questions and discussion.
Great. That works for us. So I'll let Ivan launch if he wants, or do you want me to, Dr. Duran?
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and launch? I'm just jumping back in, and we're
okay. So I think then, Mike, if you're putting up the annual plan, that would be the thing that we should be looking at on the screen. Thank you. Okay, so just to reiterate, remember that we have a 5-year strategic plan, and each year we create an annual plan that provides some benchmark targets to ultimately meet those goals that we've set in the strategic plan. So all of our, for goals 1, 2, and 3, and then we also have those supporting goals of 4 and 5, they should all be leading toward ultimately us realizing the goals that we've set in our strategic plan. So that's just to set the reminder about what the annual plan is about. Given the situation last year, we could not complete or measure the measures, or many of the measures that we had set in our annual plan last year. And so it made it a little tricky for us in terms of measuring our progress toward our strategic plan. And we're trying to shift by looking at some different measures then, because we still want to achieve those things that we set out in our strategic plan, regardless of where we are physically with our students. So we still want student well-being, we still want academic success and graduation success, and we still want creators of the future world. So how can we achieve that regardless of where we are physically with kids? So that's just sort of setting the stage for this annual plan. So if you would please go to page 3. We're just going to highlight for you I think about 4 of the goals that we've set in here that might look somewhat different from our previous annual plan, or that might need a little more explanation. And we're only anticipating to spend a total of about 10 minutes on the annual plan, and then we'll go back and be ready for questions when you're ready for that. Okay, so what we wanted to draw attention to on this page is goal 1A. And if you remember, goal 1 is all about student well-being, and that when we wrote the strategic plan, we were looking at sense of belonging for our students. And the way we were measuring sense of belonging was with the Panorama survey, which we're still doing. And the Panorama survey is done annually. Some schools also do it in the spring as well, but all schools conduct the Panorama survey in the fall. So last year we struggled because our students were remote suddenly, and sense of belonging became critically important, yet really difficult for us strategically to achieve. And so the way that we started measuring student well-being was through these student surveys that we did more frequently. And through the student survey, you remember that data from Kelly Aramaki, we saw where we had some significant issues, especially obviously with peer connection. Some students were getting peer connections with their teachers, setting up small groups or opportunities, and some were not. And it was really a struggle for our students. And so what we looked at was, well, how can we this year, what are we really after this year for measuring our student well-being? And what we decided is that it's going to be hard for us to give you a numeric goal for Panorama, because we give Panorama in the fall, and we're not sure what that sense of belonging is going to be like. So we're not sure if we could say, hey, we'll go up by 10 points on Panorama. We're just not sure. But we do know what's real for us is that peer connection, and can we really focus on that peer connection and continue to measure that using a student survey, even if we may adjust some of the questions to get deeper about what we mean by peer connection and student connection. Can we tell you whether or not we're getting better at providing those opportunities for students? So what you see here is that we would like to do that through the spring to spring, looking at the survey data, and in looking at our students who identify as Black, both in elementary, in middle, and in high school, across the board, consistently and persistently, we see that there is a low sense of belonging, and we feel that it is our imperative to focus on that student group. And there are things that we can do very intentionally to increase the sense of connection for that student group. And so we'll be doing focus groups and student activities that will generate better peer connection and ultimately a sense of belonging, and that we'd like to measure through multiple measures, being focus groups or surveys or other ways that kids might even help us identify. So we wanted to pull that up, and we'll wait for questions at the end, but we wanted to pull that up because it does look different, and we wanted to give you the rationale for that. So now, Mike, if you could please go to slide 4, and Naomi is going to talk about the goal around growth, our growth goal.
Good afternoon. Our growth goal is now goal 2E, and this past spring we had worked through potential standardized measures of growth that we have access to and could be looking at in multiple grades and subjects. And we got additional direction for you that you'd like to see a more organic, teacher-driven way of thinking about student growth. So over this course of the next year, we're going to be working on that. We'll start out in the fall by creating a team of teachers with consultants, students, and families to research and explore different options, and then choose one, start piloting it, and have something to present by the end of the school year. This is going to be a very interesting year to be working on different ways of thinking about growth, given that we're likely to be in a hybrid and potentially back and forth and remote environment. So that provides us with a lot of opportunities. It also means it's a little bit of a moving target. So what we develop this year, we might need to continue to adapt in future years, hopefully back to a more normal school environment. So that's the plan this year for student growth.
Thank you, Naomi. Mike, can you please go to slide 5? And Jeff Thomas will be talking about our staff engagement plan. And Jeff, if you could just focus on one of your key areas, please.
Thank you, Eva. The area that I believe will be most important for us to focus on is really looking at the area of reducing staff mobility. And we are actually establishing a review of the transfer and placement processes for certificated staff. And I think the biggest area that we think we have an opportunity to address is looking at the critical criteria and how we go about assigning teachers and transferring teachers. So we think that area is going to be really important for us to look at this next year. We will continue to focus on our diversification of our certificated staff and administrators, but that's an area that previously we have not looked at.
Thank you, Jeff. And now if you would please go to slide 11. And Heather Edlund is going to share about special education.
Hi, good afternoon. So yeah, just a couple of minutes on this. I think one of the things that we really tried to do this year was nest this goal in various places. One being aligned to the district strategic plan and recognizing we need to improve the academic performance of students with disabilities in order to achieve our overall district targets, but also really nesting it within where we're seeing disproportionality and looking at the critical criteria lens. And so targeting again what has been identified as a trend in the wrong direction of increasing disproportionality of Black and Latino, Latina, and Latinx students in special education services, and really starting to analyze why that is in place. One shift we did need to make this year was with respect, last year we did use the membership, participation, and learning rubric to assess the quality of the LRE data, which will continue to measure the LRE. The challenge we have right now is that that measure is no longer valid for both remote and in-person environments. And so we've been working with the consultant on that, Dr. Michael McSheehan, and hope to have a measure in place to also look at the quality of time that students are spending in the least restrictive environment. But keeping in mind that these are all lagging indicators of efforts that we make in terms of changing mindsets around how students have access to the general education setting, et cetera. So that's the theory of action.
Thank you, Heather. So that concludes our highlights from our annual plan. Obviously, there is much, much more in the annual plan. And so if there was an area we didn't highlight that you have questions about, perhaps we could do that at the end of this meeting, or not of this meeting, but of this section. And we could move then into the return to school in the fall, if that's acceptable.
That works for me. Other board members, is there anyone who has a clarifying question about the annual plan materials presented that you'd like clarified before we move on so that you're not stuck in a wondering space? All right, sounds like we can move on. Thanks, Eva.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Mike, if you could pull up the PowerPoint that's for the return to school. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. Just a reminder that that the board did adopt formally just some commitments that we as a district and the board had collaboratively developed. And in those commitments to our community, we highlighted that we want that it is our highest priority to protect the health and safety of our students, our staff, and our families that we serve. And that in addition, we want to educate each and every student, and we want them to have a full year of education and aligned with the excellent education that they've come to enjoy in the Bellevue School District. And that while we're making these plans for return to school, we want to engage and support our stakeholders. And ultimately, we do want to meet the essential needs of our families, as we did when we had to close schools before. For example, making sure that families have access to food and other essential needs that they may have. So these are all of the things that we're committed to in our planning for however we return in the fall. So we have some things that we want to share with you. Melissa DeVita and I have been leading this effort for the return to school in the fall, and it's been a challenge because there's a lot of unknowns about how we're going to be returning, and we're taking into consideration all of the guidance that we would get from the state, including the health department. So what you're going to hear from us will have some aspects of that in there, and we will also be listening for and looking forward to some guidance from you about our return in the fall, and we appreciate your partnership in this work. Next slide, please. And speaking of the partnership, some of the things that we heard from you and some of the things we've heard from our community are some things about how it went last fall and how we need to show up differently this fall, or last spring, and how we need to show up differently this fall. And so here are some things that we highlighted as our key learnings from the spring in terms of students and staff resilience. There was a lot of need to be flexible and adaptable in the changing situation and new environment that we were in, and we were really pleased to see the level of adaptability that we witnessed for many of our students and our staff. We also noticed that equity and access became our highest priority. In other words, we knew that some students did not have access that was necessary in order for them to have any amount of learning. And so we really doubled down on our efforts to ensure that they had the technology and devices and support they needed in order to be able to access learning. And then we also noted that instruction, when we offered instruction in small group, that seemed to be effective because it gave kids an opportunity to see each other, to participate, to see their teacher, and to interact. And that kind of learning format was ideal. The in-person learning was really appreciated by our students and I think by our staff and by our families. We also noted that personal connection became critically important because we were all isolated. Adults and students, we were all isolated in a way that we've never been isolated before. And so those connections became even more critically important. And then finally, we know that our families and students need support. We need to continue to have robust plans on how we're going to very quickly provide the level of support that our students and families and staff are asking for. Next slide, please. You're not expected to read this. This is very small font, but we wanted to give you a visual of the work that is going on right now. So currently we have all of these implementation teams running, and you can see the names of the implementation team leaders. And this is not an exhaustive list of the work that they're doing, but here's some examples of the work that they're doing within each of these implementation teams. Many of these implementation teams also have sub-teams within them. And so they're doing multiple activities in preparation for the return. And we've asked them to do that, to be planning for initially for our 100% in-person, a hybrid, and 100% remote. So there's been a lot of work going on. We just wanted you to have a visual for the work that's going on behind the scenes. Next slide, please. As we've been planning, there have been 3 scenarios we've been planning for. One is an in-person hybrid model where we would have students, some students would come in person full time. They would come back on a normal schedule. That would be our preschoolers, kindergarten, 1st and 2nd graders, as well as some students with specific needs at all grade levels. They would come back full time in person with physical distancing, small class sizes. Definitely a lot of things put into place to ensure their safety and health. The rest of the students, grades 3 through 12, would be coming back 50% of the time in person and 50% of the time remote. And so perhaps 2 days a week in person, perhaps 2 days a week remote, with each class split in half for that purpose. again, some students would be coming full-time in person. So this is what we're calling the hybrid model. In addition, we have students who are served in our transition program, and those class sizes are small enough that we believe students could come back full-time in person. If we're not able to come back in person in the hybrid model, then we would have to be back into full-time remote, which is what we had last spring. However, we have learned a lot from last spring, and we would have a new way of serving students in our full-time remote. And so we've been working hard on what that model could look like. So in the event that schools are closed and we cannot open in the fall, or in the event we open in a hybrid model and we have to switch, I'm sorry that keeps dinging. I don't know how to turn it off, but so I'm sorry for that little ding you're hearing. So if we have to close or we cannot open, we will be in full remote, and we do have some plans already in place on how we could address that. And then finally, the BSD virtual is what we're calling our full online model. That's for students who do not plan to return in any in-person instruction for either the full semester or the full year. And so those students will be enrolled, and we have much that we can share with you about that and some decisions we've been making. Next slide, please. Okay, we did send out a survey, and I know the survey was frustrating for many of our parents because we didn't have a lot of information to share, and we needed to know how many parents, no matter what, were not planning on sending their students back in person, no matter what model. By knowing this, it helps us to decide what could we physically offer then in person. And so as you can see from this data, we've received back almost 73% of our students responding. And of that, approximately 1/4 are indicating that they prefer a 100% remote option. In other words, no matter what, they're not sending their child back for the first semester, perhaps the rest of the year. We have not reached every family, and we have a robust plan now to do individual contacts to get this information from every family. So we have more information. We'll be going deeper into this with you, but this is our basic information that we shared. And yes, we did get this information by school. We know it down to the student level. We know where we need to do a lot of work to get families to respond. But this is the high level picture of those responses. Next slide, please. We also surveyed our staff. This survey is open until July 31st, and so we have not received as many responses yet. A little under 1/2 of the staff has responded. And of those that are responding, about 75% have indicated that they would be able to return in a in-person mode. And about 25% have said they either physically cannot because of health risks, or they would prefer not for other reasons, like perhaps they have someone with high risk in their family. So then you can see that we're also looking at our certificated educators and what is their response rate. And it's approximately 1/3 that would prefer to remain in a remote setting to provide instruction. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of a description about why a little rationale for why we were thinking of the hybrid model. So if we can return for any amount in person, rather than the 100% in person, there are some reasons why we're recommending a hybrid instead of 100% in person. Part of the reason is, well, the student and mental and physical health has to do with why we want students to come back at all. We do think that kids need that connection to school, to normalcy, to peers. And so we really would love to be able to welcome our students back in some way. And we do know that some students really are experiencing harm by not being able to come in, that it's really difficult for them to engage in their home situation. In other words, there's not a quiet space for them to work and to engage online, for example. We also know that by coming in person, now this research I'm hearing changing almost every day, but about children and teens appear less likely to infect adults or less likely to be infected and to pass along the infection. But we're hearing lots of different research coming out daily about that. It just hasn't been long enough to have any really longitudinal data. And then finally, we know that our parents and educators, as you just saw, would like to return in person. And so we would like them to be able to return in person. It just might not be feasible. We know it's not feasible to bring every student back and all of our educators back in person. But the hybrid model, we think, will get us there when we are able to return in person. Next slide, please. Melissa.
Thanks, Eva. So if we do come back in the hybrid model, then we do have some closure protocols as to what to do when and if we get a COVID case. So if somebody is showing symptoms of COVID, we would definitely send them home, ask them to isolate, test, and/or quarantine, and we would do contact tracing to find out who has been in contact with them and in what manner. And then we would look at asking them to quarantine as well. If we have more than 4 confirmed cases within a school building within 2 weeks, we would then close that building for deep cleaning, and those affected, again through contact tracing, would either be isolated or quarantined, and those unaffected could return. Remember that we are looking at doing some group distancing, so we wouldn't have as much interaction, especially at some of our elementary schools, between classes and grade levels and that type of thing. So say a classroom at first grade was affected, it may not affect the 5th graders, and so those students could return to the building after the deep cleaning. Next slide. But there's a lot going on in our community around COVID, and this data is about a week old. King County is supposed to update this every Tuesday. As of 4 o'clock, I have not seen the update for today, but basically this is one of the measures that they use to monitor what is going on with COVID in our community. So this is the average number of cases per day for the past 14 days per 100,000 residents. So back in March, and this is from March 1st to July 13th, the target that they would like to be at is 25 cases. And back in March, on March 15th, when we closed schools, we are at 24 cases per day as the 14-day average. But on March 15th, there was 38 cases that day. And so anytime that you're on an up curve, the daily cases that you're going to see are always going to be greater than the average that you see for the previous 14 days. When you're on a down curve, your daily cases will be less than what the average is for the previous 14 days. So as you can see, we came down and we were really close to those 25 cases per day average for a pretty extended period of time until you get to the 1st of July. And then we started rising again. And then as of July 13th, we are at an 14-day average of 85.6 cases, and then a daily of 136 daily. So the rate that this line is going is just about equivalent to what it was on March 15th at the same time that we closed schools last fall, or last spring. I just want you to be aware of what we're looking at in King County and where we're at right now. And if we get more updated data, we'll share that as well. Go ahead, Mike. So in addition to looking at King County, the King County website also has daily results that you can look at for cities. So they don't have the data we were looking at just before, except for countywide. But if you look at the daily dashboards, this is for Bellevue. And one of the things that they obviously look at is the number of tests and then the positive test rate. And so for Bellevue, that positive rate was 5.1%, and this is as of yesterday, July 20th. We are below the King County rate. The King County rate is 5.4%. So while we're below, we are not significantly below. Okay, next slide. So as we're looking at fall, Eva said we did have a couple of options out there. There was a report issued late last week that the health department talked about where it basically said that Washington State is in the early stages of exponential statewide outbreak, and that unless our collective behaviors changed and the policies supporting that changed, the current trends continue, we can expect that schools will not be able to open safely in the fall. And schools are not an isolated bubble. They are part of the community in which they reside. So we basically have the same options that Eva was just talking about. So we have our hybrid option, which would be the 5 days per week for pre-K through 2nd, and then 3rd through 12th, at least 2 days per week with physical distancing. And then the transition program, again, 5 days per week with physical distancing. And other precautionary measures as well. So, you know, screening as kids entered schools, availability of hand sanitizer, hand washing built into the daily schedule, more group separation in addition to individual physical distancing, taking temperatures. So there's a number of mask wearing. There's a number of things that we are putting in place to support the hybrid model. We can also go to 100% temporary, where we can move the hybrid model over to the 100% temporary remote. So basically, we could start with 100% temporary remote for the families that signed up for hybrid. We would basically then have all students working remotely for 5 days per week. We would want to be able to provide daycare to support our families and our teachers. We would have specific services offered in person so that students that were most impacted by remote learning and are struggling with remote learning, we could do some in-person offerings, but it'd be a much smaller group than if we went to the hybrid across the board. And then we could provide study spaces for online learning for students that have a difficult time learning at home, needed some additional, a quiet place to come and work. And we could provide some transportation services in support of that, and then reassess it after, say, 6 weeks. We also have the BSD virtual program that Eva talked about quite a bit for the families that want to be remote, at least for the first semester, if not for the entire school year. Okay, next slide.
Actually, Melissa, I'm going to pop in real quick here. If you go back real quick.
Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I just want to add on briefly, just I can share a few things with you all, because I was just on a call with King County Health and a few other superintendents, but there's a few things that were said on the call that kind of were striking to me that I think is important to add on to this. You know, one was even the statement that is here that was released from the situation report. They was on a call with King County Director Patty Hayes, and this idea of safely and being able to return safely is something that she really doesn't recommend us using. Matter of fact, a statement that they put out for us was that we cannot imagine a way to open schools without the risk of significant transmission of COVID-19 based on the current trajectory of infections in the King County. And so basically it's this idea that we can reduce the risk, but we're not going to be able to actually have, you know, a purely safe environment. And so it's kind of a misnomer for us even to be saying that. The other parts that I think were important is that adding on to what Melissa said on those other slides is that they said that our trajectory, you know, is like Florida, and, you know, it's not, in some cases, it's not necessarily fair to compare ourselves to Florida because of just difference in leadership and different work that's gone on. But the fact is that there's definitely some significant changes in terms of what we're seeing in terms of the numbers and what's happening there. And then the final thing I'll say is that I think that, you know, I think it's really important for us to be thinking about how we work to, you know, support our students, you know, our staff, and, you know, our community as a whole. Because the thing that was striking for me was, as Melissa alluded to earlier, around so much this is about human behavior and what people are choosing to do and what people are not choosing to do. And that's what that situation report really called out. On the call, it was shared that, you know, that there's not one area here in King County that we could say this one particular situation is what's causing our increases to happen. 10% of it is coming from cases where people have traveled to other locations, and sorry about that. Boy, we just got all kinds of dinging happening right now. But 10% of the cases are from people who are traveling out of state and then returning. They also are seeing large gatherings being a real problem, including, barbecues in backyards, and people not following the physical distancing guidelines. So they're just seeing it's a wide range of things that are tied to human behaviors within our community that are, very challenging for us to mitigate. Thanks, Melissa.
Okay, so next slide. So here's the schedule for us. We started providing families with a weekly update. We started that last Monday or yesterday. We're expecting an update from CDC, OSPI, and the Department of Health this week. We are going to be publishing our instructional schedules in our next weekly update, which would be July 27th. And then moving forward, August 20th, we owe SPI our reopening plan. And then we're going to have staff training in August. We need to get those dates set, and then school starts on September 3rd. So that is where we're at and where we're going. And at this time, we would love any questions.
Melissa, just to start out with a clarification on that schedule before we move off that slide and into the deeper topics. The OSPI reopening plan submitted by August 20th, that reopening plan requires board approval, and I'm wondering what's the timeline for presenting a full draft plan to the board for consideration, and then any updates to it. So are you thinking the first August board meeting to present that, and then the second one to finalize it, or where's the thinking there?
We are currently working on filling the plan out right now, so I think we could at least give you a portion of it in the first board meeting, and then finish off the rest of it for the second board meeting, but give it to you early enough so that you can raise questions, ask questions, and we can make modifications as necessary. So I think it's going to come to you in two stages.
Thanks. Okay, thank you for that. I think that the second board meeting is on the 19th of August, so we meet the August 20th requirement if we need to get it in stages. So that's fine. Board members, why don't we start just clarifying questions, and let's not turn them into contemplative questions. Like, let's get everyone clarified, and then let's go into the deeper questions, because I think Seema's already got a couple, so we'll start there. But clarifying questions first.
Okay, I had questions, and then when I heard from Ivan, that changed it. So I guess what I will just ask, Ivan, is what you learned a short while ago, does it mean that the hybrid model that Melissa just talked about is essentially out of reach? That's my first question. And second, I think, Melissa, when we think about either of those two things you talked about, either the hybrid model or for those, and I'm thinking especially those with challenging home environments where they have to say I'm virtual only, I was really happy to hear that you're trying to think about a way to have them have some safe in-person contact. I'm wondering, is that too also now prohibitive in light of what Ivan has said? And is use of outdoor while the weather is decent in any way, does that help mitigate any of the things we could do, such as a student who has to opt for virtual only always because they live in a multi-generation home or they live in a very small apartment? If they want to at least be able to see their teacher once a month, is using outdoors at all a way that we could help support that child? So those are my questions.
So those are very substantive questions. So let's hold one moment and just make sure that no one has any clarification questions so that we can get those quickly taken care of, so no one's sitting and confused or wondering. Francine, Carolyn, or Erica, do you have any clarifying questions before we get into this very substantive discussion?
I have a quick one on, well, I don't know how quick it'll be, I guess, but on the closure protocols regarding the more than 4 cases within 2 weeks. I'll say it seems like a lot, but you've made a comment, Melissa, that a first grade classroom with a case wouldn't necessarily affect a fifth grade classroom, but what happens to the rest of the first graders in that classroom? Are they excluded from school for however long?
Yeah, so they would be they would be quarantined, but we would be giving them 100% remote at that time. So if they've had contact with the student in the time, or with students at the time when they were infected or ability to pass it on, then they too would be quarantined for the 2-week period to see if they develop symptoms. And we would then put them into a 100% remote model, and we'll be sharing those schedules next week. But they would basically have their same teacher teaching to them remotely.
Okay. Any other clarifying just questions to get this clear so that we can get into the super substantive and meaningful questions like Seema has asked? Carolyn, you're on mute.
Oh, all right. I'm always on the wrong thing. I noticed that on the slide with the infection rates in Bellevue, we have some figures there. And then we also talk about we're going to get guidance on July 24th. So I just want to clarify and understand that we don't, or is it true that we don't really have a guideline like that we could really count on, like X number of cases per 100,000 with a such and such positive rate, you know, like where we know, like now we're looking at closing, now we're looking at reopening. I'm just clarifying that they haven't really given us that, or
no, they have not.
Yeah.
No, we have not gotten that from the Department of Health.
Okay,
Carolyn, to be extra clear, we have been advocating for that. So I have been in contact with the State Department of Health, the County Public Health Department, the County Council, the Governor's Office, etc., asking OSPI, the State Board of Education, asking them for a more complete set of health criteria, health-based risk assessment criteria for us to use in making these determinations so that we as an organization can turn our focus to planning education and learning and training of teachers. And we're getting very slow response. It seems that the climate is not politically set up for some reason. I don't know exactly what the answers are, but we're not getting great response in a clear, concerted way across districts. So I am meeting with, Francine as well, is meeting with a set of East King County school districts to compare notes and try to keep us all in touch. Ivan just came from the Puget Sound ESD superintendent's meeting, and Melissa has groups, like everyone has groups that they're trying to meet with and keep us connected and consistent, but there is no agency in the state or in the county right now who is providing clear guidelines for what is safe for our students and teachers.
Really? Well, thank you for trying. I just wanted to put that out there so that, you know, people listening to the meeting know we don't have that guideline.
Yeah.
And just to add on to that when we don't anticipate that coming from King County Health at this time, we do possibly have that. It could be coming down from the state again. Understand that the governor, you know, will be adding some additional pieces to turn the dial back, and to the term they use, ratchet down again, you know, where we are, but that's just kind of information that we're waiting for. We haven't confirmed any of that at this time.
All right, thank you. I'm sorry we're having to work in this information deficit.
That seems like an exceptional segue to Seema's questions, unless there are any other clarifying questions.
Well, I did have one, hopefully brief one, which is that we saw the percentages of students and families that responded and the percentages of the staff response, although it's disappointing because that one's not complete yet. There seems to be a mismatch in terms of the numbers so far. You have some breakdown in terms of the grades levels. So for example, if we're doing 100% even in the hybrid for our lower grades, are those teachers indicating that they're going to return? Jeff said earlier that we're not anticipating necessarily a deficit of teachers, and yet the educator slide does seem to be mismatched with the student response.
So we're working through that right now. We don't have the specifics of all the teachers, so we only have like 50% of the teachers in. I don't necessarily expect the trends to change that much necessarily, unless they change based upon the data that we have now in terms of what is happening with the number of cases locally and things like that. So as we continue to get later, if the trends continue as they are, I would expect the teachers not wanting to come back would update a bit. The staff survey closes July 31st. That being said, Marie Telecki and I are working through by grade, by school, what people have opted for. And then we have about 25% of our families or so that did not respond. And so we have an outreach program for those families that we are going through right now. But we are making some assumptions that the trends that for each school and grade level that is in place will carry to those families, just so that we can, again, get through all the staffing things. So we don't have the numbers for that, Francine, but we're deep into working through all of that right now.
So just to be crystal clear, the question that I heard implied, I'm not sure if it was quite asked, was does the availability of teachers correspond to the stated needs of kids? What do we know about that at this point?
Yeah, and I can't answer that right now because so everything doesn't come in those little packages of 24 or 25 kids, and so literally until we go in and work through the detail, it's really hard to say, because there are years when we add, 70 kids to the overall enrollment, and yet we add 12 teachers or something, right? Because of the way they spread and the class size and all of that kind of stuff. So, the spread between the families and the teachers is about 7 percentile. So is that a huge spread? Not necessarily, but we need to work through the detail to really have that answer.
Thank you, Melissa. So Seema, can you just summarize just really high level so that we're all back in the same space that you invited us to come to, what the things are you'd like answered next?
Sure. So I think high level, if I take what Ivan described as an update, and Melissa, what you and before that Eva were describing, I think I'm asking at the highest level is what Ivan just said, does it make realistically the hybrid model something that in theory we've developed? It only launches if our data goes a dramatically different direction, but right now, effectively, I'm hearing it's off the table. That's the first question. I think the second bucket or rubric would be, especially Melissa, you talked about, and I was happy to hear this because I was thinking about this. Is there a way short of hybrid that we could help students who essentially have to say, I've got to be virtual only, but they're starting a school year and they don't even have the benefit of what they had last year, was at least they knew some of the kids in their class. They knew, they'd seen the faces of the teachers. Is there any way that you have thought about and that you think is workable, where for those students, we could find a way to have even like a once a month or some kind of a check-in. And then I think a corollary to that is, where does good weather and outside play a role? Because we know about the positive aspects of that, of being outside. Can we use that to our benefit? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of it. Thank you.
I can answer the second part, and I'll leave Ivan to the first part. But so yeah, there could be ways. I mean, right now, if we operate under the 5 people from different households being able to meet, we could have them meet with their teachers in smaller groups of 5. We could meet outside, absolutely. In nice weather, we've got some tools, for example, that teachers can use that has the 6 feet measured out, so they can put a big circle together and have the kids sit every 6 feet, for example, outside on the field. We could set up tables and things outside where undercover so that they can meet there. We know that outside air is better than inside air, but even if we have some kids coming inside, we did run the daycare program, and we still are, with isolated groups of 8. And we did that all summer with nobody coming down with a case. And these were
actually we
frontline
started
workers.
in March. Melissa. We started it in March. It wasn't just
Right.
in summer.
Right, and these were frontline workers. So I think we've learned quite a bit there, where we can have isolated small groups of kids who stay together as a compact unit. You know, so they do develop relationships and things. And in that, we could then have them doing their online remote learning in that classroom and in that group. So there's a lot of different things that we can do. You know, if we don't have the full numbers of people who are interested in remote coming back, even if we create support spaces for older kids, you know, you put one per table, for example, in the common space, then you are quite spread out in those areas, as opposed to having 16 in the classroom, for example. So there's a lot of things that we definitely can do to create some of that connection and that opportunity.
Sorry, go ahead, Ivan.
No, go ahead,
Let's wait on Ivan, because I think Ivan's going to follow up on the other question, and Erica has a follow up to this one. So let's get Erica first, and then we'll get Ivan.
That kind of ties into what I was asking, which is in the hybrid model, it included full-time in school for certain students, either special needs or the very youngest who can't read or whatever. So what would that sort of end up looking like?
Yeah, that's still going to be our highest priority, Erica. Students, our youngest students and our students with specific needs will still be our highest priority, and to what extent we can provide them in-person services, whether it's through childcare or some other way that we're going to have them access their remote learning or in-person learning, that will still be part of our plan, because we know that it really didn't work well for our preschool and kindergarten students to try to access their learning online. And so that will still continue to be our priority. I also will say that, you know, the article that some of us read last night about having alternative spaces for kids, you know, we keep thinking about just the youngest kids, but there are ways that we can get creative and provide spaces for kids to come in for our middle and high school who are hungry for some interaction with peers. Even if it's a small limited group, they'd still really enjoy having that. And another idea that was provided at our steering committee by someone who was observing was, hey, why don't you do a reverse broadcast where the teacher can broadcast from home and some of the kids might be in a classroom or whatever. There's definitely a lot that we can do, especially if we keep the kids in sort of like familial groups and provide them maybe with headphones or whatever. We've been talking about that and looking at what are some things we can do, because we absolutely don't want our kids to be isolated for a long period of time again. That's not ideal.
Yeah. We're also absolutely, an in-person contact is really important, but also just to help with the learning and to get rid of some of the technology issues and things. We have classroom sets for every student, and so every student will be on a district issued device. And the importance of that is that we know how it's set up, we know how it functions. Teachers will not have to solve so many different technical issues. And so I think that'll be helpful, just at least to know that the technology that they have will work for what we're trying to do.
And Erica, can you call out the stuff that you know about from Eastside Pathways that's happening, just so we can add that into this discussion, and then we'll go to the next piece.
Yeah, so in the I'll just basically read my text. In the online all partners meeting that Eastside Pathways is having, they includes a remote living and learning group with different partners discussing strategies for supporting students, not just academically, but socially as well. And through partners like Kids Quest, the YMCA, that was this morning's call. And there was a lady from North Shore who said that their PTSAs were getting involved as well for creating online social spaces.
All right, thanks. All right, so does that take us to Ivan being able to answer Seema's initial question?
All right. Yeah, so Seema, to answer your question, I think, I think from the very beginning, when our first commitments was, protect health of our, students and staff, in as best as possible. And I think that, the thing that was striking for me in this call today was that, just again, the statement that if the health cases continue, there's no way we can open. I mean, that's literally what is coming out. And so at this time, my recommendation would be that we open up in the fall in a 100% remote. I should say we open up in remote learning, with the caveat that we are still thinking about how we can do some of what we just discussed, because I do think that some of the things that are still going to be top of mind for us are going to be food security, childcare, and I think we have to really address the issues around equity that are going to arise here. And so I believe that by doing that, by making the announcement now, it'll allow our teams to really pivot in another deeper way to think about what are all those scenarios that we could play into for outdoor learning spaces, bringing groups of students back in a as physically distant, safe way as possible. Melissa's point around our childcare and what we were able to do over the summer, really did show us that it is possible. I think the other part that just was striking for me that I hadn't heard so straight up from somebody from the county health office before, just briefly look at my notes here, because what they said was, just that we have to really be prepared for aggressive masking. I mean, I've never heard that term before. We continually saying face coverings, but to hear a county person say we need to have, be prepared for aggressive masking is, really just a pretty important statement. And then the other part that ties into, some of the pieces Melissa just touched on around even the cases that, and if we have to close our schools, is that she basically stated that, are we prepared to be shutting down our schools on a weekly basis and reopening them, because it basically will just be a process that we will be going based on where we are right now. So at this time, I do not believe that the hybrid model would be the best thing that we could do for our students in our community and our staff. But I do think it gives us the opportunity to really just, again, dig deeper and think about what else do we do in order to create and some more meaningful experiences for our students and families. So that is my thoughts based on this. And I was also struck that, as Christine alluded to, all the advocacy work that her and Francine have been doing to try to get answers, that comments that, well, we're surprised no one has made this decision yet. So now we're 297 school districts are in a position trying to make this decision on our own. And so we definitely have to be paying attention to what other districts are doing, because what they do have deep impact on us, especially considering, we know that, again, 35% of our staff live in Bellevue. So just think that it's something that we're not going to be able to do at this time, but it still allows us to be able to think about what we could do to try to support our students and families in the best way possible.
So I want to build a little bit on this. I don't know who's talking right now.
It was just me, Carolyn.
Okay, do you want to ask a question about what Ivan just said?
I just wanted to follow up on that. So unfortunately, I've also come to believe what you're just saying. And I know that being remote causes a lot of hardship on families. And I'm just wondering, I think we did a good job trying to provide the childcare and so forth so far. But what would the capacity be for childcare under the completely remote scenario? And how would we prioritize? Because I know first responders, healthcare workers and stuff, but also families where, they really need to go out in-person jobs just to be able to earn a living. And I'm wondering if we have any sense of how many people would be in that position and what we could possibly offer. That was question one. And question two is, has anybody from any of these health departments or anywhere talked about testing? Because it seems like testing would be one way to make this whole thing safer.
Carolyn, we've asked about testing. We've also asked about a hotline, and we've asked about fast turnaround testing. And unless Ivan got something new today, there is no plan to support us with any sort of access to rapid turnaround testing. We're welcome to set that up with labs ourselves, but the turnaround times on a lot of the testing is 4 to 5 days. So if you're trying to run a large open building of hundreds of people, you end up like pulling them in quarantine, putting them back in school for a couple days, putting them out in quarantine.
We need the faster turnaround. Again, this is a question I'm just asking to, so that we can put it out there for the community to know that we have asked about testing and we're not getting the support that we need.
So there's information on King County, again, on King County's key indicators regarding testing capacity. And what they would like to have is more than 50 tests for every positive result. They are not there. They're at about 32, low 30s in terms of number of tests run for each positive result. So we are not conducting as many tests as they would like us to be conducting. That being said, childcare capacity, great question. We don't have the answer for that. Some of it depends on staff willing to work. And we have a lot of buildings and we have a lot of classrooms, right? But we really need to look at who's willing to work, how many buildings we do want to set up, where people are located who are interested in childcare. So there's a lot of different factors that will go into those decisions, and we are just not there at this time. So that's one of the things that we really need to focus on in the next couple of weeks. Eva, I know you want to say something as well.
And I'll just also add on that this is why, if we support this recommendation, why making this decision now will help us, because that'll allow us to kind of repivot in some cases with some of our teams, really say, okay, now let's get this information, figure out what we can do to support our families in the best way possible in this situation. Because I think we all, we want to have our students back, we want to have our educators back, but again, I'm just saying I'm just really struck again by this notion that we shouldn't even be using this idea of returning to school safely. That to me says a lot.
Don't use that word, but so I think the thing is knowing all the disadvantages of being 100% remote, now we can focus on trying to mitigate as many of those disadvantages as possible.
Yeah, you think Eva had a final comment on this area as well? No?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that our community partners, I think, would be really interested in partnering with us in terms of childcare as well, just to make sure that we would have sufficient for the parents that would want or need childcare services because they're going back to work or whatever they need. And it's a great way for us to be able to support our kids who need some support while they're doing the remote learning. So I think it's kind of a win-win in the community to help support our families. And then I just also wanted to say about testing. I haven't done much research into it, but I did hear about Finland's. Did you hear about the breathalyzer that only takes 2 minutes to get a response? San Francisco, I think, is going to be testing that tool, and that I did hear that it's even more reliable than our current testing method, and so the results are even more reliable. So I'm hopeful. I'm feeling hopeful.
There have been things like that in the press recently, either with pooled testing or the one that goes on spit even. So yes, I just hope but it's not something we as a district can just pull out of a hat.
Yeah, right. Not yet.
All right. So I'm gonna make a couple comments and ask 2 questions. The first comment that I want to make is our superintendent just made a very powerful statement to us that all the evidence that staff is gathering and all the exposure that they have to health guidelines and health officials and state officials on the state of this pandemic are pointing to the unlikelihood for us being in a position to go back in person right away in the fall, that we would most likely be going back with a remote scenario, a nearly fully remote scenario. I'm not sure, I'm not going to call it a fully remote scenario because it sounds like we're actually going to try to do something different. In a minute, I want to get board input and thoughts about that direction, make sure that we're on the same page, and if there are questions or concerns about that, because that's what the convergence of evidence is pointing to. So that's a big deal. It's not something we've surfaced in our project. It's something that has just really come together rapidly in the last few days. As last week, they had all these press conferences and the data was just so inconsistent for people, and our teachers and our families are worried, and our educators are worried about the plans they're making, and we just don't have the health-based guidance that we're looking for. So that's that's something we need to touch base on. So put a mark there. We'll come back to that in a little bit. Second thing is, if that is the case, I would like to say that we should commit to advocating with our county and state level agencies, the central government agencies and the health-based agencies, for coming up with some phased guidance for reopening, because we still have developed this concept of, you know, when we can have some more in-person contact, could we at least get started with a dual model of part remote, part at home, with smaller groups of kids, or something like that. So that's still going to be an open question. So I don't want to say, oh, now that we decided this is what's happening, we drop that on the ground. Let's keep working on getting that guidance. And if the agencies can't provide it, and finding a way to articulate it, so our community, so our teachers, our staff, our families, ourselves, we all know what the plan is, what the criteria are, and how we'll know if we're ready for another phase. And then the two questions that I have are both around pivoting us to thinking about learning. Like we're thinking about so many things to support learning. Now I want to talk a little bit about instruction and learning itself. I'm wondering first, with the partners, we have a lot of partners who work in our schools, like Jubilee Reach and Rainier Scholars Rainier Athletes, and several other partners who come into the schools either after school or during school. Are we doing anything to coordinate with them so that if we have small on-site groups, but we don't have the certificated staffing to monitor that on site, but you know, doing that thing Eva said, where a teacher may be broadcasting to multiple small groups, but there's someone present to facilitate and support that small group. Are we getting creative with partners about their ability to not just support the outside stuff, but also the instructional activities? And the second question I have is, where are we at in terms of defining what's going to be different about our learning plan? Not just the logistics, like who gets to be on campus and who's spread out and who's at home, or even just the schedule of when kids learn, but what happens during that learning? What's the best practice for teachers, and getting them trained and getting them to also contribute, like what worked and what didn't work. Some of them have already picked up a huge wealth of information about that from the spring. How are we leveraging that? How are we creating and constructing and articulating and training for better learning in the fall? So those are my two questions.
To turn my fan off and turn the camera on at the same time. Those are great questions, and I think leveraging our partners is going to be critical. It does increase potentially the number of adults in the room, right? So we have to think about that, but because we would want a staff person obviously in the room if we're holding any kind of student gathering, but our partners also can work virtually. We used our partners and we used our staff really creatively during the spring closing for our graduation success plan. We can take those kinds of ideas and how we individualized support for students. We can take that and extrapolate it out, and using our community partners. We have a wealth of community partners who want to help, and we will capitalize on that. So that was a great suggestion. Thank you for that, and one that we will want to take.
Can you clarify, Eva, just that we would need to have staff in the room if we have learning going on? Like, if you consider something like what was described in the article you referenced, where kids are effectively having some kind of childcare experience on site in small groups, but teachers may be doing remote instruction to those small groups.
Yeah.
Would we actually then need a BSD staff person if we were partnering with, like when we had the Boys and Girls Club running childcare at one of our sites, I didn't think we had BSD staff in the rooms with the Boys and Girls Club staff.
No. Okay, if we are essentially just providing the space and they're running the program, but if it's our program, yes, we would need to have a BSD staff person. You know, we'd be ultimately responsible. But you're right, we could have community partners come in and run the space and provide the adults. That'd be terrific. I was seeing it more. I thought your suggestion was more around We do have folks who come in, like through Rainier Athletes, for example, who come in and they provide mentorship or coaching for specific students for their academic success. We wouldn't just have them with a group of kids, right?
Got it. No, I just wanted to make sure, like, my suggestion was actually anything and everything that we can leverage partners to help us with learning.
Absolutely, 100%. I'm with you. Yep. And then the second part about defining about what is going to be different with learning, we do have implementation teams who are looking at that and coming up with recommendations around professional development. We've especially been looking at what the EAG proposed for culturally responsive practices that are sustaining practices. And so that recommendation out of that committee, Sharon and I met with that committee, some folks from that committee, to hear about their recommendations and the research that they've been doing. And so how do we couple that with this sort of opportunity to reimagine instruction and think about what is it that we already know about best practice, but how does that lend itself to this new context that we're in? And so there's been a lot of groups, our groups have been doing a lot of research on that and putting together plans on how we can work with our teachers around learning. And some proposals will be coming forward from our professional development implementation team about how we support our teachers in an ongoing way to do that.
Will we be able to start the training and engagement of a larger pool of teachers and coaches in August, early August, so that we have time?
Yes, that's the plan. We definitely want to be able to launch some of this training in August and then sustain it through the year. But we want to be able to have some nice chunks of time where all of our staff can get some training. Definitely. Yeah, that's the idea.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Francine, do you want to chime in? I don't think we've heard your questions yet.
Thanks. So I appreciate all of the discussion around making sure there's safety of our students. I do want talk more about the instructional aspect. So sounds like we may be moving some things off the table, and yet there's been discussion about the 100% remote, now sometimes called distance, now called virtual learning. So it has different names. And then there's the hybrid model, which now sounds potentially will actually start as 100% remote or mostly remote, and some students receiving additional support. I do want to know more about what the main differences are between the two models, or will the students be learning the same thing? Are they covering the same standards? How will we know students are learning? Will assessments differ? I feel like those are major components in order to then have the right training and development. Previously, it did seem like it was going to be a really large lift, for example, for an educator to be in the classroom, teaching students in the classroom, potentially simultaneously teaching them a group that was remote by live streaming. As exciting as some of the ideas were about turn and talk with someone virtual and someone in the classroom, it did seem like there were lots of opportunities for it to go wrong, and basically students not having education for a majority of the time. And so I do want to hear more about those issues. And then I just have one other comment right now, which is that if we do start mostly remote, and it does, and I also want to say that not only right now in King County, we're in phase 2, which is limits to 5 people, but even if we were to progress and go to phase 3, that's now been changed to a limit of 10 people gathering. And at the rate we're going, we're probably going to go back more to phase 1. And so if we're going to try to provide services to students, if we're going to try to mitigate the negative impacts, it would seem that we also need to advocate for not having our spaces closed. So in other words, our spaces remaining open, as opposed to in the spring, for the most part, they were closed. We were not able to bring in students at all under hardly any circumstances except for the essential services. And so that all of these ideas we're discussing to mitigate the negative impacts of closure are predicated on having that space and that access. And so I don't know if there's been any talk about that, but it seems really important that we somehow continue to advocate for that. And I know Christine and I are in spaces that are doing it, and the administration is as well, but I do want to bring that up. So main question is about, can we talk more about our different learning models, how we're going to know that students are learning? Are we providing them different strands? Because I do have concerns about the equity of that and what that looks like. And it does seem to be more complicated to do these different things. If at this point, maybe everyone's going to be remote. And then some of our advocacy efforts. Thanks.
Okay, let me take a stab at it. So your first question about the difference between the virtual program, the BSD virtual, and the temporary remote. With the BSD virtual being for students who are opting to be virtual for an entire semester or perhaps even an entire year by choice. The temporary remote is not necessarily by choice. It's because we cannot open our schools in the way that we had wanted to for the hybrid model. And so it's temporary, and students are going to be served remotely with the understanding that we're going to try to do some things where some kids can have some space for learning. So what's the difference between the two? All right, so we have implementation teams that are working on those right now, but I will tell you that how they're looking is that they would both offer some synchronous and asynchronous learning time for kids. That's what we're looking at, and that's what we're considering most is, and that's what we've been reading about is probably the most beneficial for kids. So that not that kids would be staring at a screen for 7 hours straight necessarily, but also so that they would be just kind of on their own all the time either. Like there's got to be a balance. And so we are looking at a balance. We're also looking at it looking very, very similar. So what would be offered in the temporary remote would be very similar to the virtual program. In other words, following a bell schedule, the 7-period schedule, the content would be very similar. The difference, well, also let me keep with the similarities, keeping kids together in their school groups to the extent possible. So obviously when we have students who signed up for the virtual program, for the long-term virtual program, when we only get 5 kids at one grade level, obviously we're not going to be able to have that be the only, that's all that there will be in that first grade class, let's say. So we would have to combine with another school, but to the extent possible, we want to keep them with their cohort. It doesn't mean though that they would necessarily have a teacher from their school. If there happens to be a first grade teacher from one of those schools, then that would be a great assignment. We're going to do as much of that matching as we can as possible, recognizing that it's only to the extent possible that we can do it. There may be some mixing of kids. So that's the virtual program. The temporary remote will have teachers from, they'll be assigned to a class. They're going to have their classroom teacher, and that will be it for the whole year. That's their class. And so that's the plan for the temporary remote, because we want to be able to quickly switch into, now we're back in person, whether it's a hybrid model or however we're in person. As we come back in person, we'll have already have those cohorts together in a classroom, if that makes sense. The content will be very similar for both the virtual in elementary, middle, and high, and the virtual program, which is the long-term program, or the temporary remote. That is our goal, is to use our content to the extent possible, and to use our teachers to the extent possible. Does that help, Francine?
Yes, what about how do we know that students are learning that portion? So in the spring, we anticipate that there were potentially gaps in what students learned. There wasn't a way to assess it, and the idea was that, oh, in the fall we'll figure it out. So now we're coming up to the fall. So how are we going to figure out where students are so we can meet them where they're at, fill in the gaps, and then how do we know that they're continuing to learn from that point?
I see Naomi is here. Thank you, Naomi.
Yes. We've drafted a plan to do exactly that. And as we've drafted it, we have kept in mind that it needs to work in either a remote or an in-person environment, because we weren't sure what we were planning for. So it will involve universal screeners and diagnostics for students, and then ongoing progress monitoring. It's currently in draft form. We're taking it to stakeholders for review this week, and we should be able to finalize it relatively soon.
Naomi, can you say more about that with respect to the best practices that research suggests So my understanding is that doing assessments prior to the start of a school class that are outside of the context of the lessons of the next grade level or the next course level that kids are supposed to be in, ends up labeling kids and ends up putting them backwards and puts them in more of a remediation scenario. And that the best practice is actually to assess in the moment which skills are missing from that particular area that the kids are learning about in the next grade level or the next course level. How are we going to protect from impacts, unintended impacts to labeling kids in that way, or putting them back in remediation scenarios that actually widen the gap and don't advance them?
Yes, absolutely. We've been taking all of that into consideration as we've been doing the planning. And I would like to continue to get stakeholder feedback before we share our planning with the board. So I'm hoping we can postpone that conversation until we're ready to bring that to the board.
Okay. Are there, board directors, thanks Naomi, are there any other questions related to this area that Francine has surfaced around instruction, assessment, and so forth that you want to raise?
I wonder if I misheard something.
Carolyn, let's get clarification on what you heard, and then let's go to Erica.
Eva was saying something about using our content and our teachers, I think was the phrase she used. And I wondered if that implied that we weren't going to use our, that there's a possibility of not doing that, not using our content and our teachers.
No, I wasn't trying to imply that we wouldn't use our content and our teachers. No, I was not trying to imply that we would not use our content.
Okay, that scared me. Like all of a sudden we'd be contracting with somebody and
No, no, there was that question early on, like, are we going to need to buy a canned program or something like that? And we do not want to buy a canned program. We haven't had as much success with those canned programs, and they cost money, even though that would have been the simple and easy thing to do. But we are looking at the curriculum, like what are some other things that really lend themselves well to online learning, such as, and we use these already in the classrooms, but like adaptive software programs. Those programs lend themselves very well to online learning because they meet kids where they are in terms of their skill level. They're easy to track whether or not the students are doing the work, and they're fun. Most kids like them, so there are things that we can use, and we'll likely use more than we've used in the, in the brick and mortar classroom, but they're not like we've never used them.
So we're just going to weave them into our content.
I don't know if there's anyone else. I don't know if Sharon Couts, is there anything more that you wanted to say about that from curriculum standpoint?
Around the instructional piece?
Yeah, just around the curriculum in a remote learning for the virtual program.
So you mean the one that Maria's going on, that Maria's starting?
Yes.
Okay. I know that what I've heard through that group is that they are planning on using our curriculum, our standard, the Common Core state standards. We are planning to have the experience with whichever environment the kids are in to be, as similar as possible. To Naomi's point around the assessments, everyone will be taking the same assessments no matter which environment they're in, so that we will have a clear understanding about where students are and what their needs are, and ensuring that students that need more support are getting more support, but still getting the grade level standards. And I think that's super important. To your question, Christine, that we are ensuring that we're giving all students the grade level standards. They may also need extra support to get to that position in being able to access them, but we are continuing to make sure that kids are getting the grade level standards that are required by the state.
Sharon, you have led perfectly into my question, which was, I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but has there been any guidance from the state or the federal government about what standards, whether there's going to be any kind of like flexibility in standards for students who have not been in school, hypothetically, for 3 months already, and maybe it's going to be 9, maybe it's going to be another year.
No, the guidance is to do that ourselves and to utilize the Common Core state standards and the state standards.
And I'd say, Erica, there was one group that was at a national level that did put some recommendations on some essential standards that they, put out, for school districts to consider. But it's just recommended. There's nothing coming from government oversight in any way to do that.
Thank you.
I have some follow-ups. Basically, Eva, you mentioned that the ones in the sort of hybrid, some in-person model would be set with their class, and I understand what that means for elementary, but I'm not quite clear what it means for middle and high school. Is the idea, or is this not ready yet because it's still in the there are a number of possibility phases in terms of how much, if at all, we would be cohorting students. So just wondering if there was more behind that statement. In other words, if they're with their class, does that mean they're with the same only 15 students already? And then part and parcel with that, for especially for middle and high school, is are there some classes then that are not, or courses that are not being offered? And if so, or even if they are being offered because they are not such, maybe not as rich of an experience in the remote environment. There had been some talk previously, I had asked this, that students would be able to switch their classes. So to a different elective, for example, that might be better in a remote environment.
Okay. Let's see. So will they be able to stay with their teachers? Okay. So when so first of all, you just heard for the first time tonight, this decision is really new about going to the full temporary remote learning plan. So it's not fully fleshed out. However, the thinking has been all along, as we've been thinking about this, that if we were to have started, let's say, in a hybrid or 100% in person and then gone to remote, think of those classrooms as staying with their teacher. Those are the kids who were enrolled to come in person. They're going to be with their teacher. So we are going to be opening, it sounds like, in the temporary remote. And in doing that, they will be assigned a teacher, or at the middle and high school level, a series of teachers, and those will be their teachers when we return. So yes, they will they will have the teachers that they would have if they return. So in grades kindergarten, first, second grade, preschool, yes, class sizes of 16 in order for us to do the physical distancing.
Eva, can you make a clarification on that? So yeah. You said in some cases there would be kids who are grouped from multiple schools together, yes, because of different things. In that case, when we return, would kids be offered the opportunity to all go to a common school if it were elementary, or to change schools or whatever? Like, what would you do with that hybrid class?
So for that group that I was talking about, that's for the virtual school. That's for the kids who are enrolled in the online virtual school for the entire year or for a semester. So those kids aren't enrolled in a classroom at their neighborhood school yet. They are they're enrolled remotely for the entire semester. So if we come back, let's say in November, they wouldn't be coming back.
Got it. Thank you. I'm sorry to get that confused. Yeah. Francine, jump back in. I didn't mean to take us off rails.
No, that's okay. I just didn't understand. And then, Francine, you also asked, are there some courses that will not be offered? The answer is yes. And we're not ready to announce that yet because we are trying to be thoughtful and communicate with the teachers first for whom those courses won't be, so we can kind of problem solve about what that will be before, so that they don't hear about it the first time at a board meeting or from a friend or something like that. So we're trying to be thoughtful about that. But yes, there will be courses that have to be altered or not offered because they're just not feasible in this environment. Your last question was about switching electives, and I'm not sure what you meant by that, but I'm guessing it would just follow the same process typically of switching a class that you would go through your school's counselor, but I think that's what you're asking. Like, I want to have a schedule change because the course I signed up, maybe that elective isn't offered anymore, or because I was thinking we would be back 100%. Is that what you were asking?
Basically, I mean, I think it was maybe back in the May meeting, I asked a similar question and was, yes, if there are all these changes, students could change the electives that they've requested because it doesn't make sense in the remote environment, especially since they may have experienced that in the spring. But they had already signed up for classes by the time we closed. A lot of them had. So if that is the case, then it would be nice to know relatively soon what the process will be for that. So if it is contact your counselor, but counselors don't come back until the last week in August, then that does seem to impact their schedules potentially quite significantly for many students. So hopefully
here's what I would say, and I'm not really like making this up as I go, but here's my first response to your question is kids signed up for their classes and they signed up for, generally we have them sign up for more than one elective. In other words, this is my first choice, second choice, third choice. So my guess would be, and Tom Denwell's leading this effort, my guess would be that we would then go to their second elective if the first elective is no longer feasible or offered. And sometimes that happens just because the schedule doesn't work out and they do not get their first elective. So we will be signing kids up for what they signed up for. We're not going to go back and have kids re-register all over again. So it would have to be a one-off for a student to change their schedule. We just don't have the capacity to offer that up to all kids right now. Like, would you like to take different classes given where we're at? We'll be signing them up for the classes that they signed up for. And if they don't get their first elective because it's no longer offered or it's not feasible, we'll put them in their second choice or third choice.
But to Francine's point, just to clarify, if they don't have a viable alternative, like maybe they signed up for welding or glass blowing or, you know, everything you could possibly want to do on site. So all their alternatives just spiral out. What happens? Are we going to go ahead and proactively contact them before the counselors come back in the end of August so that they get a fair shake at a decent schedule? Is that kind of where you were going, Francine?
Yes, I think it's a concern for a lot of students. I mean, right now, you haven't released which ones aren't going to be offered. Obviously, for some students, it's a big part of their identity that these classes that they take. It could be something that they're planning, especially along the CTE courses that are really important for their post-secondary plans. And so, you know, there are all different levels of what an elective means to a student. But it could be a significant, it's almost half their day for many students. And so I think people need to know, what does that mean? Or am I only going to have 5 classes out of 7? But other people are having 7, right? It's one thing if you said, well, everyone's having just 5 classes because we were cohorting or something like that. But it sounds like there isn't a move to cohort, at least in this stage in planning, and that there is the idea to keep 7 classes. And so for some students, there may not be 7 classes available to them.
So there will be 7 classes. It might not be the classes they wanted, but there will be 7 classes available to them. The electives might not be the ones that they had initially wanted, or any of them that they wanted, like Christine said. It could be like this kid had just happened to pick all of the ones that we would no longer be able to offer. Although I will say it's very few classes.
It's a small list.
It's a very short list. Most of them, if there was any issue, they're just being modified, but not discontinued. It's a very short list.
Because we have teachers too. So the other side of that is if we eliminate the class, we need to find classes for the teacher as well. So our best bet is to figure out how do we modify the course in order to still be able to offer it to the students and have a teacher teach what they have been teaching, right? So we're trying to avoid eliminating classes if at all possible.
I'm just going to do a quick follow-up to that. Does that mean that you would consider some of these CTE classes as some of the things that you might offer small groups on-site instruction with in some cases?
So I know that Marilyn has been working with all the CTE teachers on different ways to offer those courses and things with 3D modeling, and if they're in person, then we've got special disinfectants. And so there's just been a lot of work going on. So I can't answer for very specific courses. I just know that the CTE department, they've been focusing on this since last spring in terms of how to make CTE courses viable, whether we be in person in small group, in smaller class sizes, or whether we be remote.
Thanks for that. And I think Carolyn had a follow-up on class size that she was going to ask.
Sorry. Yes. I was just thinking, trying to digest this, from the parent perspective. And I'm wondering, about class sizes, because if you sign up for the hybrid model, then likely you're going to have a class of 16 so that you can pivot right back to perhaps actually coming in whenever that's possible. But if you sign up for the online version from the get-go, it seems, would you have a much larger class, and will people feel like, oh, dang, if I would have just been able to guess that out, I could have had my kid with a smaller class with more attention from the teacher?
Well, not much larger. I mean, I have to say this, like a lot of our classes, remember our averages are 21, 22. So we're not talking much larger, like we're not talking 30, 35, 40, you know what I mean? So remember, we're talking, our class sizes aren't that big. And then when you see the instructional schedule, I think the impact will not be significant.
Okay, because that would be a worry, because you're thinking if there's 16 over here, then the excess has to go somewhere. So you'd think they,
well, remember that we're doing the hybrid too, right, for fourth grade, third grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at those, then that's 16 2 days a week and 16 2 days a week. Do you see what I'm saying? With
yeah. So. Okay, so it can work out, and we can put that one aside. Okay.
We're working through all of those numbers right now. Yeah. I mean, literally, we spent 4 hours on it today. So.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah.
All right. So I have 2 more questions, but before I ask them, I want to see, Seema, we haven't heard from you for a little bit. Do you have some follow-ups or some additional questions that you want to get out there?
I'm good for now. So I know we have to be precious with time, so I'm good right now. Thank you.
Okay, we have another 10 minutes allocated. So who's that?
This is Francine. I just want to check. So we've been focused on the reopening plan, and I think rightly so. I had a whole series of things on the annual plan, but I'm going to hold them then until later. Is that correct? Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because I do have some things that are pretty substantive on the annual plan as well.
Yeah, I think maybe what we'll do is at the end of this, as we sort of wrap up this segment, we might let board members give a 1-minute summary of any key issues that they're going to raise, so that staff has sort of like a preview of some of the concerns. We won't go into the specifics like goal by goal, but if there's one goal that's really worrying or a trend you see across goals that you want to address, if we can give them that heads up before Thursday, that would be super helpful. But so hold on to those for a sec. And did you have another question about reopening?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, but no.
Seema, you're there.
No, I'm sorry, because I said I didn't have one, and then I immediately, of course, thought of a question. So the one thing I was going to ask is that part about if you elected all virtual, kind of your class and your cohorts, there's going to be an implication about tying back to your home school or not. I found that a little confusing, and I just want to ask, do we have a sense, and I realize we're still developing the plan in light of the latest breaking information, but I want to ensure that no one who elects all virtual or all remote, or whatever the term we use will be, is without understanding about the implications for, what their quote unquote homeschool or home class is, if and when there comes a time when we hopefully can go back to a partial in-person or all in-person model. So that's something that might be more of an FYI. Let's be very careful about that, or it might be an invitation to ask, how do you think you're going to be communicating that?
So just so you're aware, they will remain tied to their home school for counselor support, psych support, you know, some of the services that are outside of their classroom. They will remain tied to their home school, even if they're 100% virtual for the semester or the school year. And the plan is to have them go back to their home school if they opt to go back to hybrid or some sort of in-person. Now, I need to caveat that a bit in that if we are still in the in physical distancing and things, we're leaving room in the classrooms in our buildings so that there's some room for people to move back and forth. But say we have a 4th grader who wants to come back to Eastgate, and if those classrooms are already at 16, 16, and 16, let's say we have 3 of them at 16, and we get 1 student coming in, I don't know that we would add a 4th classroom, and we would offer them other options like Somersets available or locals available. We cannot afford then to divide those 3 classrooms into 4 for 1 student. So there may be some give and take there, but because we've never had these hard limits before. You know, we've always had room for kids to join classes in their neighborhood schools, but so we're going to build in some open capacity so that there is room, but I don't have a crystal ball to know how many people are going to want to be moving back and forth, and we have to fit it within our financial structures.
I wonder, though, Melissa, in light of the fact that we seem to be making a significant pivot right now with significant new information, if there's time to communicate to folks that if we've made this pivot, what our intent is to go back in the fall and how we intend to have some sort of, I assume, health-based risk management criteria for guiding our decision for like going back to in-person. If that might make some of the folks who initially elected for full remote say, oh, actually, I think I'll try the start remote, and kind of give them a week or two to know what the implications are and invite them to make a decision. And if there may also be people in the other direction who are like, oh, wait a second, if you're going to start outside of school, I just want to be in a program that I feel consistent for my kid about, or whatever. Right. I just wonder if we could at least communicate and maybe offer an opportunity for update.
Yeah, and we can. I mean, we're reaching out to everybody right now anyway who hadn't responded, and so we can offer that opportunity to pivot if people would like to pivot. But at some point, we're going to have to lock those things down so that we can align teachers. We can get master schedules done. We can look at what teachers are certified in what, so that we make sure that they're aligned to the appropriate grade level and subject matter and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to have to pivot and then get it locked down relatively quickly, but we could definitely give people one more shot at, because we have people that haven't responded. So maybe after we get the schedules out, we put some information around the programs. The schedules are supposed to go out the 27th, and we ask them one more time to provide us their final commitment. So yeah.
I agree.
We're going to
chime in
for that.
I just want to chime in that I agree with Christine. I mean, basically in the course of this meeting, it sounds like we have changed what it looks like, or it sounds like. I don't know that that has been 100% confirmed to be the decision, but it definitely sounds like it. So that's a pretty big shift. So I agree with Christine that that would be really the right thing to do for our community.
So we'll work on a timeline for that to make sure that we can do that in a timely manner and get that information out in a timely manner.
Thanks, Melissa. That's awesome. I'm going to throw my last 2 questions out there, and then if any other board member has a final question, we'll take that. Then what we'll do is we have a few minutes of flexibility. So I have 2 questions we'll ask board members to answer, and then we'll move forward. So my final 2 questions about the reopening plan are, you talked about having a work group that's working on instructional plans and return to classroom and best practices and all that sort of stuff. But I imagine that's kind of a tight work group. Do you have anything yet, or do you plan to have something that is a group of people working on third grade instruction and curriculum, a group of people working on chemistry courses for the high school, you know, that sort of thing that's either subject or grade specific, and really robustly developing materials and strategies and things, because when the teachers come back to train, we want to have stuff for them, I guess. So where are we at on that? And then I'll ask my other question, but you can answer that one first. The other question that I have is, there is an amazing group of teachers and coaches out in our community who took on this idea of looking at grading practices, something that comes up from all sorts of places across our district, and that has come up quite a bit in this whole COVID outside of school learning. How do we grade in a way that is equitable to every single kid and that is reasonable and useful and productive to motivate learning or to do all the right things? Anyway, this group has taken on a book study over the summer, and they've got 6 different groups of teachers, counselors, coaches, I think even some administrators meeting, 6 different groups of them meeting every week to talk about different ideas about the grading. And I am wondering if we are leveraging that group and how we are making sure that group is connected to the work group on grading. And I'll later be asking about how we're connecting that work group to our greater annual plan goals. But I know there's a small work group you've got on grading. So those are the 2 sort of work group pieces that I'd like to just hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, I can take that. We have several, just like we did in the spring where we brought together all the course level teams. So we have several course level teams at all the secondary schools, working through the pacing guides, what we want to make sure we're paying attention to around instruction. And there's one team that is working on an instructional model that includes, let me just open something up and I'm not going to go there. So anyway, it'd take me too long to find it, but they've been coming up with some guiding questions around what a good instructional model will look like in a remote environment that is also great in a non-remote environment. And they have guiding questions similar to, like, what are you doing when you're planning? How are you paying, particular attention to students receiving ELL services, IEPs, other marginalized groups? How are you honoring and valuing the voices of the students? Being really clear about what the objectives are and how we're using language. So we're giving students opportunities to listen, to speak, to read, to write. A lot of social emotional learning is also included in this lesson template. And then some information about what materials students might be using if they're learning asynchronously. And I think we talked about some of those before around Flipgrid and different collaboration spaces. And I think Eva also mentioned this earlier, that we really found that small group instruction was much better in this environment. And so while the teacher may be doing some live work with the whole group and then breaking in and working with a small group while other groups are working together and then moving around. I'm trying to say moving around in the room, but you know what I mean, moving around virtually in the room. And so, yes, and we have elementary grade level teams also continuing to work on the instruction, and we ask kids about what worked well and what didn't work well, and we're utilizing that information. And then as far as the grading practices, John Harrison is leading that team. And I know that there are several members of that team, because many of them started in the teaching and learning department, and then we just expanded it and it got bigger and bigger. And so many of them asked to participate on that team. And so I don't know, John, if you want to add anything more to that, but yes,
it's a great team. I've got 10 folks on the team, 3 administrators, 7 teachers, and 6 of the 7 teachers are a part of that book study group. and it's really exciting. You know, we've taken on the state superintendent's challenge of looking at grading, and in the past, how sometimes it's been inequitable and added to some of the disparities that we see in student outcomes, as well as you know, OSBI's guidance that we need to address grading moving forward. So we're in the process of developing proposal recommendations. We're not quite there yet. We have a meeting on Friday, and kind of the focus really is working towards a set of grading practices that are clear, concise, and result in more equitable outcomes for kids, and you know, and to ensure that grades are accurate, you know, resistant to bias, and motivational, and I think most importantly accurate. So it's a great team. It's working well together. We're you know, seeking out student voice. I know some of the folks on the team are using the book study participants as a bit of a sounding board as we continue our work, and I'm pretty excited about what we're going to produce.
Oh, oops. All right, thank you. That's super exciting. Appreciate the thorough answers. Board members, do you have anyone have a final question on the plan that you feel like you need to get answered right now? Okay, so I'm going to ask 2 questions of the board members. We're just going to do in a round for each of them, and then we're going to move to public comments. Question 1 is, do you have any questions, input, feedback, concerns about what our superintendent shared with us, that it doesn't look like it will be feasible to have any scenario except a full remote with some exceptions kind of scenario set up for opening in the fall? So now's the time for questions and feedback. The second question I'll ask you is, do you have anything about the annual plan, any trends or issues you want to raise really quickly without any comments for the staff? So Seema, you ready?
I think the main one, and I know Melissa started on it, but I'd say the main question / concern is, how can we ensure that our communications around this are going to be clear? Because I think for those of us who had our head in this for a while, it doesn't seem like maybe we need to consider that we're kind of almost starting all over in terms of communication. But I think for those who maybe responded to the survey, they may need to understand and recalibrate on where they are, what their response is, which is another way of saying, I don't think we just have to capture the delta of those from whom we didn't hear. We may need to find a way to broadly communicate, make it clear why we've made this decision, and how the fact is that this is fluid, and with better data, which fingers crossed we may have in a few months, we have a plan for how and why we might go to hybrid. And then people can ensure that the decision they're making, which may have consequences in 6 months, is one that's informed. So that's
Let's just keep going around the board here. Francine?
I think the decision to go ahead with a plan is helpful. So there can be a lot of concerted efforts to just make sure that we are doing the best practices we can for remote learning, that we can make wherever we are able to mitigate the disadvantages, whether that means bringing some students in, helping our most marginalized populations, making sure we continue to meet essential needs, that those happen, so we can really be focused on making that best possible situation out of this particular scenario. I think it is really incumbent on us. There's not much time left. I am really concerned about making sure we're providing adequate resources to our educators to make sure they're trained to deliver this best possible model, that there's going to be adequate time, curricular materials for students. I have to say that this past spring, we know it was a crisis situation, but there is a huge amount of improvement that we can make, and we want to be able to see that for our students. So making sure our educators are supported, and again, to echo some of the things that Seema just said, so that communication to our students and families is really clear. So I am for us making a decision so that we can make it the best possible experience for our students and for our whole community.
Carolyn, you want to chime in?
I am actually very relieved by this decision. It's something that I have been extremely worried about, and I think that the title of that study that came out that said schools are not an island really really summed it up. It's about the health of our whole community and the transmission cycles, and the kids possibly passing it to parents who might then possibly pass it to elders and circulating through the community. So I think it's the right decision from a public health standard viewpoint, but I very much do worry about families that need to be able to earn a living during all this and need to be able to get out to work. So hopefully we'll be able to help with that and help with some other basic needs, but I just feel like this is the right decision because we don't know the long-term sequelae, even for kids who are asymptomatic. You know, are they going to have diminished lung capacity or something? We just don't know because this virus is so new. I keep thinking about what are they going to write in the history books about us, because if you go back and look at the history books of the flu, they'll say, well, this city really did the wrong thing, and that city did much better. And I want to be one of the ones that's in this city did the right thing category. Yeah, so I am a bit relieved, but I find that I still have lots of concerns. Also, I was going to just add one more thing. I know there's some voices in our community who really think this is much ado about nothing and are going to put that out there. And I just feel like it's more serious than some people realize because of the sequelae and because of the fact that the transmission cycles can reach the vulnerable.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just going to echo pretty much what Francine said, which I think this is going in the right direction, but I do want to see the plan for how we're going to handle the groups for whom remote learning just doesn't work, whether it's special needs or the youngest kids or families who, like, the parents cannot be home with them, and how are we going to support those families? So I'd like to see that plan whenever we have that.
All right, I think my comments are consistent with everyone else. I think it's really great for our community and our district to be converging on some kind of decision that is going to take the best factors into account and do our best by folks and be somewhat consistent with where I think a lot of other districts are heading in this time based on talking to the various folks and the health data in our county and the best advice of health officials. I do think it is imperative that we continue to collaborate and press hard for clear guidance of what it means to reopen. What are the conditions that allow us to go to the next stage, which might be hybrid, and then what are the conditions that allow us to go to the next stage, which might be full attendance? And I don't think we should let up one smidgen on that, but it may be a small side group doing it, but we shouldn't let up. The second thing I will say is, I think similar to what Francine and actually what everyone is sort of articulating, it's time to get deep, deep, deep and detailed about the plans. Exactly how are we now going to serve kids that are hard to serve in remote situations? Exactly how are we going to do instruction? Exactly what does the instructional practice look like? What is the learning model and learning theory behind it look like? And how are we training and developing materials and giving teachers all that they need to just execute on all cylinders? And also, what are the roles? How are we changing the roles of people in our district in this condition, that their roles maybe traditionally are in a building and dependent on that building space? Are we able to change roles? Are we able to access community partners to do things that help this learning? Like everybody, all hands on deck for the learning. And then at the same time, somebody should continue to work on the refining of the essential needs support. But I think the essential needs support, it would be awesome if it were more tied to the learning plan. So we have a meeting on July 29th for our whatchamacallit group, our steering committee. So it would be fantastic if we started to hear some of these things rolling out to them, and at that, the instructional pieces rolling out in that space by then. So that's kind of where I go. And communications to families. Like, I think there's a plan to just start every single week from now on communicating. That's awesome. We should do that. All right, board members, any final thoughts on this pivot we seem to be in the midst of making?
Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
You already mentioned it, Christine, the engagement of community partners, but I'd like to see how systematic and organized that can be, because I think there's a lot of work in the community that's being done in parallel when it should be being done in partnership, rather than duplicating efforts. So.
All right, I'm going to kick us off on the annual plan comments, and then I'm just going to call on folks. Maybe how about we just use the order of that we use for roll call, so people can just, they don't need me to interrupt to tell them to talk. So I am going to suggest that there are a couple of things on the annual plan measures that I want to see more tied to this COVID situation. So I really appreciated the thoughtful walk that Eva gave us through the goal 1 and why you're looking at connection as a really relevant and important metric. So that was important. But on goal 2, I see that our first 2 goals are already tied to state tests, and I'm confused about why we would do that when we're pretty sure that those state tests won't be given this year again. Maybe they will, we don't know, but it doesn't seem quite tied to the things. And I didn't see, I might have an old version. I have the version that was sent out Friday night, but I saw that there wasn't much in the goal around family engagement and communications. And I think there should be some very, very specific goals about families feeling informed and being able to engage and knowing what to do, and not just feeling informed, but through evidence that kids are engaging successfully, that families know what's happening. But I would like to see some things in that space. And I do think that in the measure of progress for the year, I'd really like to see something about thinking not just about a couple of indicative grades, but really thinking about grading in general. We have an opportunity to do that now because we have a motivation to do it. So how does grading in general help us actually measure a year's worth of learning for kids? That may be a good subpart of that goal to either pilot or have our teachers really working on and thinking about together, and really driving with our community, even conversations with parents and students. And this might be the year for it. And there were a couple other specific ones, but I think those are the big takeaways for me, are getting some real accountability and thinking to support this scenario, which is going to be a significant one. All right, Francine, let's.
So yes, I echo those things that Christine mentioned, especially around the family engagement, and then also the grading. This book that we're reading, Grading for Equity, I think it has really valuable insights that could be applied, especially this year. The other thing about equity and accountability I want to emphasize is I feel like maybe the critical criteria really aren't being applied across the board in our annual plan, and I'd like to see more of that. So in one of the early goals, there's some talk about identity, and we're looking at race in those areas. It's not clear whether it's just student identified race, because we've had discussions that identity is much broader than that. But then I go and I look at safety and security, and there's no mention of race there. And so I'd like to see perhaps some more explanation there of why that wasn't chosen when it's not chosen. So that's a big one that stands out. A smaller one along the lines of identity is in CTE. There's mention of just male, female, so we're just sticking with binary. And I'd like to, again, if we're talking about identity and keeping the student focus, making sure that we are using language that's inclusive across the board. The other big area for me was on special education. Now, as we're talking about the various challenges that we're going to be continuing to face in this coming year, We have special attention to our special needs population, but I did feel that the focus on LRE rather than actually whether students were learning and that they had, that there was design for them in their education so that they could access the information, that seemed to be missing. So I'd like to see more in the special education arena. And then the third one is especially a new ask, is that we have various departments. I don't see curriculum department listed, and I understand that a lot of their work is woven in through everywhere else, but there are some really specific curricular issues, and I think we need to have attention to those always, but especially in this coming year as well. And then I think Christine mentioned that's just in general, if we could put in a lens of, are we meeting our goals in the time of COVID? So I thought maybe I'd see something more in that in the IT department, and there wasn't. It's not a must have, but I would just like to know that that lens was applied. And if it was a non-COVID goal was chosen, that's fine, as long as I know that there are COVID goals as well, or understanding that there are ones that are impacted by that, and that those are being tracked and accounted for as well.
Carolyn?
Whoops, getting myself back on. Yes. So I have some worries, and my worries are, like, for exceptional staff, measuring engagement, and how will COVID interact with increasing the diversity of staff in light of maybe not having the budget that we thought we would originally have, like to really go out and hire people that aren't already on our staff. So there's that. Family engagement, let's talk needs to be more prominent and not have any canned responses coming back to people out of that. And then for family engagement, maybe we could have a goal that's not kind of a survey, like I think Christine alluded to this. Are the students doing their online work? Well, that would show that the family is engaged on some level, because the kids getting enough support to be able to do their work. And also, are the family's needs met? The things that we are providing. It's another way of knowing, are they accessing the food? Are they, whatever they need or that we could reasonably do. Also, our CTE goals are around STEM, and STEM works pretty okay online. But what about goals modified for COVID for the other CT, or maybe we just don't want to add that. And then communications. Bluntly, add a goal for not upsetting family with our communications. So, I got so much flooded with feedback about the binding optional survey and the way that was written. And then if people went online and they listened to, which not everybody can, to the things that both Eva and Melissa were saying, especially in the fall planning sessions, they found out that maybe it wasn't, there were reasons behind that, and it was softened. The things you were saying were softening the message a little bit and all that. So I just felt like maybe we could review our communications for how they come across so harsh before we send them out. You have to do this binding decision without enough information, and just softening it with, like, this is a feedback loop, and we understand this is hard, but we need, we can't plan without, something like came across. I know you're able to do that. And then I'm surprised, like, the bus goals aren't really mentioning health, and I think the bus is something that's really terrifying parents right now, because we've been told that there's not enough room to actually space the kids, and that's kind of scary. And then I will second the apply the critical criteria to things, and a curriculum department goals somehow worked in there. And that's not comprehensive, but that's my first pass. Yeah.
Okay, my turn then. For the main thing that came across to me is two things. One, a lot of the goals involve measuring cohorts, which I understand the reason for doing that, for investigating the effectiveness of our own programs. But I would like to see Obviously, we will also be getting data off, hopefully, data off of non-cohort students in the same grade. I'd like to see the comparisons between them so that there's really like, you know, something to gauge off of. And just sort of in general, what are the measures that we're going to be using? Some of them will now have to change if we expect the state tests not to be done, which I kind of feel like Christine is right that they won't be. But, you know, so what would be the plan for that? And then there's a number of them where it's like, this will be measured, but it's not clear what the measure is. One example is like goal 2D. It's like we will have the first outcome in June, but it doesn't actually say what the measure is going to be. So I'd like to, and that there's a few more of those throughout. So just sort of seeing what the measures are for a lot of these goals. Thank you.
And I know Seema had stepped away for a sec. Seema, are you back?
Yeah, I am. Thank you. And I heard everybody else's comments, so I'm not going to, I think, repeat everything. I would just say, I think of the things that were flagged, I would say the biggest red flags for me are around grading and understanding how, I guess I'm still working through how to look at the annual plan in light of the year ahead and how to rethink, which we were already trying to do, how we, I think, fairly, equitably, and meaningfully revise what it means to do well and how that's reflected in our grades. Is it mastery of concept? Is it, you know, an accounting of you got a D and an F early on in your quarter, even by the end of the semester, though, you mastered this topic, but you're still at a C because when we add up all the markers, it comes out to a C. But if we actually look at what you achieved and we have that a year of learning in a year's time, you really should have an A. Is this the right time to rethink that? Because it all gets so much harder in light of COVID. So I think for me, the biggest topics that are for me in need of real reassessment are the grading and how we can do that in a way that really reflects learning. Because it's so much harder for our teachers to assess our students and understand, at least it feels to me that way, when they're far away. But the other piece that I think Erica and Carolyn and others touched on really well was communications. And I look at the bus as a subcomponent of that. We have someone joining our meeting. It's so nice to see. So I would say the communications piece is really important. And I do know that many people, or some people in our community, watch our board meetings, and now they can watch them more easily. They used to listen to them, but not everybody has that bandwidth, or maybe even that awareness. And I'm wondering if we can do better to somehow level up what the key takeaways are from these very important decisions that are getting made. So that's it. Thank you.
All right. I would like to say, please, as normal with any of the stuff that staff provides for these meetings, please, board members, feel like if you have additional detailed comments, I think Carolyn alluded to having some, I know I have some, I'm guessing we all have some, please take a few minutes and send them to our superintendent so that he can collect them and be better prepared for us to have a really fruitful and productive and efficient discussion on Thursday as part of our board development and thinking about how we come to goals together. And there'll be some other board work as well about board roles and superintendent stuff. Carolyn, did you have a final comment?
Yeah, I'm having parents text me as we speak, and we're not on the reopening plan. They feel like really blindsided that they had to choose without knowing, but you know that. But they were suggesting that could there be parent representation on the various reopening committees that, you know, we had outlined on that slide with all the different things they were responsible for? That might help.
There is parent representation on some of the committees already.
Okay.
Yes, we have parent representation on the committees and on our steering committee as well. So thank you for that, though. That's
okay.
And we always welcome any feedback or questions that people have. You know, we're trying to get those answered as soon as they come in.
All right. I just dropped that in, so you know, while we're on it. Yeah. Yeah, people say they made the wrong choice on the survey.
But we have resurfaced that we have asked for additional communication and opportunities to adjust, right? So so we should have good follow-up to that. Is wait, I'm actually asking Ivan and team, is that something that's intended to happen?
Yes.
So yes, the plan is to communicate out in this communication when that would be available. So in the initial communication, letting them know that we will be asking them again, when we will be asking them again, and what the time frame for that is, so that we're giving them pre-information so that they can be prepared for it.
Carolyn, does that help with some of the questions you're getting a little bit for like the follow-up? Maybe not the.
I think that people aren't convinced about the parents on the committees. Maybe if those parents communicated somehow how they were representing parents, so then we'd be more convinced. Yeah.
That is a great piece of feedback, and I think that can be translated potentially not just into the steering committee work right now, but even into the goals on family engagement, that when we're engaging small groups to have focus groups or to have representative input, that we have to also acknowledge that there's some kind of communication to the full community.
Yeah, because when you're doing it and no one knows you're doing it, then it's better if they did know.
Okay. Great. So now, right before we go to comments, I just want to share some information because I know some people use these board meetings as ways to get information. So I'm going to share something that came out from WIA during our meeting. There have been some modifications to the sports seasons. And so it looks like what they're going to do is try to operate with some of the fall sports as normal starting in September and moving on, like cross country, maybe slow pitch softball, maybe they're not sure, girls swim and dive, golf and tennis. They're looking at those as having some kind of alternative season in the fall, maybe. Season 2 would be the winter sports as normal, but it might be a shortened season starting, they said, in December or January. Then between the winter and spring traditional sports, there would be a season for the fall sports that didn't get to happen in the earlier fall, like volleyball, girls soccer, boys football, that sort of thing. I don't know how finalized this is, but it's hot off the presses, and I'm sure we'll be communicating that and rolling it out to families in a really productive way. But it's information, and I think it's better to share this stuff. So I think it highlights how rapidly everything is changing and how the health conditions are really coming to light and how changes are being made rapidly to respond. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So any further stuff, because we're about to go to public comments. Okay, so we're on to public comments, and what we have more comments than fit in our time. So so I wanted to just say that because we have so many more comments, we did by our policy, Jen took the time to organize ahead of time and to identify and make sure that every topic that we got a comment on would have at least one comment read, and then she'll just go down through as many others as she has time for in the 10 minutes that we've allocated for reading the comments aloud. But all public comments will be part of the public record of the board meeting. And Mike has kindly put up for me the piece I have to read. So the board has accepted public comments for this meeting via online written submissions. We'll share up to 3 minutes of each comment as read by the board coordinator or other designee of the board. To maximize the number of comments read, if there are more than 3 comments, the board president may shorten the number of minutes to each comment to be read. The board will listen to all comments carefully, but will generally not respond to comments spontaneously or without further deliberation. Complaints about specific personnel will not be heard in open, can you scroll back up? In open session, and will not be part of the record of any public meeting. Harassing or derogatory statements about any persons or groups of persons will not be heard. All public comments submitted online and in compliance with the stated requirements, whether or not they are read aloud during the meeting, will be included as part of the official record for the next regular board meeting following the receipt of the comments. Public comments can also be made via the district website. Okay. All right, Jen.
Hi there. So I'll start with this, and yep. So this is from Sam Ficciaro. Topic or summary is getting back to school in person is what is best. Thank you for preserving an in-school option for the fall semester. Getting back to school in person is what is best for our family and over 70% of Bellevue families. And thank you for the hard work and communication throughout. See you in school in September. From Jennifer Carl's annual plan. And Mike, can I just check that you are timing here for the 3 minutes? Sorry, I don't want to take up the time, but
I am.
Okay, thank you. Hello, I'm writing today with public comment related to the draft annual plan that is included in the board meeting materials for today's BSD board meeting on June 21st, 2020. I wanted to specifically address the special education section of the plan, page 11. I appreciate the language in the theory of change, specifically calling out if students with an IEP have increased meaningful physical and intellectual access to the general education setting and the curriculum, then their sense of belonging and academic outcomes should improve. I believe that to be true as well, if in fact the environment and curriculum are universally designed and accessible for every learner. I find myself wondering how then the targets related solely to LRE and increased proficiency on a test are going to achieve that vision. If LRE is the data measure being used to progress monitor this goal, then I am concerned that it will miss what is of critical importance to that vision: access to general education curriculum. Simply being in a space, be it a classroom, gym, stage, or even a cafeteria, does not mean that environment has been designed in such a way to be an accessible learning environment, nor does it mean that the curriculum is accessible to every learner. How is the Bellevue School District working to achieve the accessibility of curriculum and support in the learning environment, and how can that be measured beyond simply LRE and scores on a test? I can speak to my own experience as the parent of a student with a disability and someone who cannot rely solely on speech to communicate. As her parents and advocates, we have worked tirelessly over the 16 years that our daughter has been in this school district to provide her with access to learning opportunities with her non-disabled peers as a student who was assigned into a segregated Pacific program in kindergarten. We were successful over the many years in gaining her access to a space in a general education setting, primarily CTE courses, and increasing the LRE listed in her IEP and therefore the BSD data, but that in no way translated to accessibility in what was being taught to every other student in that classroom. In fact, it was not unusual in our experience that a teacher would simply give her something else to do outside of the curriculum to occupy her because the supports to make the curriculum accessible did not exist. Assign a para to direct her in alternative content, or even have a peer mentor sit with her during the class working on something outside of the curriculum. That kind of experience does not equate to access and will not result in improved academic outcomes, and I think one could argue would potentially negatively impact one's sense of belonging. While an important data point, the risk is simply measuring LRE alone, is that it may serve to hide the continued gap in accessibility of curriculum and appropriate supports being designed into instruction. Being mindful and deliberate about universally designed learning environments will benefit the variability of all learners in a classroom. I would hope that BSD could find additional ways of measuring meaningful access to curriculum to positively impact the education and proficiency of students with disabilities and those receiving special education services. I think that there is more work to be done. Thank you for your consideration. From Tammy Riggers, please maintain the officers in the schools. Hello, I saw something on Facebook urging people to email the school board and demand the removal of SROs from schools in Bellevue. As a teacher in Bellevue, I have always found the school resource officers to be just that, a resource. They have spoken in classes, helped students with problems, and offered guidance. I am not in favor of removing the officers from the schools. I think the presence of officers in the school can go a long way to building positive relationships between students and the police. If they are removed, it seems we are sending a message that all police are bad. Please maintain the officers in the schools. Thank you, Tammy Riggers. From East Side for Black Lives. BSD must combat every form in which this racism and bias appears, and while in most cases education can solve these issues, there is one case that demands more permanent action. It is one we have been marching for weeks in front of our city halls and school buildings. Police do not belong in our schools, especially when they are armed. Dear school board members, we are a group of Black and Brown BSD students, both current and former, allied under the name Eastside for Black Lives. Throughout our time in BSD, we have experienced racism in our institutions firsthand. We prompt you to look at Black and Queer BSD on Instagram, which is a page that gets submissions from students across the district documenting their racist, sexist, transphobic, homophobic, xenophobic, and bigoted experiences with both educators, administrators, and students from the school. They have clearly outlined their issues with the lack of educators of color on our campus, lack of mental health professionals, and lack of proactive anti-racist curriculums. BSD must combat every form in which this racism and bias appears, and while in most cases education can solve these issues, there's one case that demands more permanent action. It is one we have been marching for weeks in front of our city halls and school buildings. Police do not belong in our schools, especially when they are armed. As a former police officer shared with us, presence is the first part of force. It is traumatic to see police officers kneeling on necks and brutally beating innocent Black people, who could have been our Black parents, sisters, and family members. To then see them roaming our halls when we show up for the school day is psychologically disruptive to our educational environments. Arming SROs with guns, batons, tasers, and pepper spray is ostensibly about keeping schools safe, but is inextricable from harming the learning environments of Black students. Black students rely on high school as an escape from the dangers of their world. It is harmful and jarring for their safe haven to be disrupted by armed police officers. After Columbine, over 10,000 school police officers were hired to protect against school shootings, and 20 years later, they haven't stopped a single active shooter. Tragic school shootings like the Parkland massacre had SROs in the building who weren't able to intervene and stop the active shooter. We know that on top of creating safety, SROs are also SROs are supposed to foster adolescent development, community building, and more. However, schools haven't gotten much safer or better with cops floating around. Instead, millions of kids have permanent charges on their record on issues that could have been handled internally. Kids in your own district deal with the discomfort and bias of SROs every day, whether it is through negative interaction, punishment, or simply the presence of an armed officer in a learning environment. Their presence is harmful. We share the same values of prioritizing a safe environment for all students and of creating the best learning environment possible. It is because we share these values that we have to ask you to reflect on which students are truly being served by current policies. The illusion of safety and the consequent peace of mind for most parents, students, and community members cannot come at the cost of the safety and security of our Black students and community, Eastside for Black Lives. From Sophia Roger. Immediate removal of all SROs from BSD schools and an equity policy that will protect students of color from racist BSD faculty members and students. Dear school board members and Dr. Duran, I am incredibly disheartened and frustrated. The way you responded to our request to remove SROs from BSD schools and your inaction regarding the implementation of a timely equity policy is very underwhelming. Students feel as if they are being criminalized at school. Latinx, Black, and African American students have expressed the duress and fear they feel when they step into a BSD school. SROs cannot have presence in an educational environment. Every student has the right to be educated in a safe and welcoming space. Your inaction to our demands speaks on behalf of your apathy toward our well-being. A 20-minute assembly or a meet and greet between students and SROs will not solve the issue at hand. We request the immediate removal of all SROs from BSD schools and an equity policy that will protect students of color from racist BSD faculty members and students. Thank you for your consideration, Sophia Roger. From Ashley Boston, please stand alongside me and advocate for me to be able to return to my community with educators, students, and families at Lake Hills for the 2021 school year as a special education teacher.
Jen, we will have about 1 minute for this one, just to give you the time check.
Thanks. Dear community, in August, and you'll have to stop me because I can't monitor the time at the same time. Dear community, in August when I was involuntarily transferred for the second time in my career as a special education teacher in Bellevue, I wrote the following quote on a piece of poster board for when the question, why continue to work in Bellevue School District is asked. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, to our most bitter opponents we say, we shall match your capacity to inflict suffering by our capacity to endure suffering. We shall meet your physical force with soul force. Do to us what you will, and we shall continue to love you. We cannot, in all good conscience, obey your unjust laws because non-cooperation with evil is much a moral obligation as is cooperation with good. Throw us in jail and we shall still love you. Bomb our homes and threaten our children, we shall still love you. Send your hooded perpetrators of violence into our community at the midnight hour and beat us and leave us half dead, and we shall still love you. But be assured that we will wear you down by our capacity to suffer. One day we shall win freedom, but not only for ourselves. We shall so appeal to your heart and conscience that we shall win you in the process, and our victory will be a double victory. My answer then is still my answer now. Love is the answer and love wins. My leaving says, I deserve better. I have been treated poorly and so unjustly. I am leaving. So do I think I deserve more and matter more than all the other teachers and staff? No. We matter, not I. We means me and all the other educators. Words like we and all.
All right. Thank you, Jen, for the reading, and thank you to all the community members who took the time to send in. I again want to reiterate that the board receives all the comments and reads and consumes all of the comments. We take some additional time in our meetings to have a chance to surface them as well, just so the public can get a sense of them as well, and then we post those that we don't have time to read aloud. But I hope that helps everyone get a sense of the different things that people in our district are thinking about and really advocating for this week. So thank you, Jen, for helping with that. And thanks to our community. I think this takes us to a very short break. So we have about 5 minutes. It's 6:45 on the time. So if we could be back at about 6:50, we could get started again. All right, we'll just take another 15 seconds and then we'll go ahead and get restarted. So board members, make sure that you give a little wave that you're back online so we know we're good to go. Thank you. Okay, I don't have full confirmation, but I think we should get our presentation set up and get started. So I think, are we going, I don't have my screen up yet, but are we going to budget? Is that right?
Yes, that's next on the agenda.
Awesome. All right, let me pull that up. And I think we should get started with that. So we have dedicated about 40 minutes for this. The board business piece will be short, so the other board business. So go ahead and Melissa, are you going to do a short presentation and then take questions, or is this mostly presentation?
No, this presentation should be pretty quick, but I think it's important to set the stage for where we're going in the next couple of years.
Thank you. That's super helpful. And maybe as you go, you might make a few comments about any of the uncertainties of COVID if they're not fully embedded or if there's anything new that's come up.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, board. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about our 2020-2021 budget overview. Go ahead, Mike. So the most important thing that we need to recognize is that our 4-year revenue outlook is basically flat. So if you look between 2019-20 and 2021, there's about $800,000 difference. So on a $365 million budget, that's really quite nominal. Our revenue split continues to be approximately the same, with 17% of it coming from federal and other income. And the other income is primarily from tuition-based programs like early learning and after school, and also transfers from other funds like our capital and tech fund. And then we get about 14% from our local levy, and then the remainder comes from the state, and that's about 68%. So the split stays about the same, but we really do not see any growth in the next 4 years. Go ahead, Mike. So last July when we met, I said that revenue has been growing at an average of 9% per year in the past, but over the next 3 years, we expected this average to drop to about 1.3%. And with no changes in the funding models, we would either have to reduce expenditures, including potential reduction in staffing, or reduce general fund reserves to maintain financial stability. Well, that is where we are at. So we have flat or declining enrollment. We have forecasted declining enrollment for the coming year because of COVID-19, and the number of families that we have from out of the country and overseas, and how movement has basically dropped from that. So we have the flat revenue, we have increasing costs, and we have COVID-19 impacts. So for this past year, as you know, that had a cost impact between cost increases and revenue losses of about $4.5 million. Basically, we cannot continue to do business as usual. Go ahead. So where have we been? Well, at the start of the 2019-20 school year, we budgeted the reserves to be $38.5 million, and we budgeted for a reduction of those reserves over the course of the year of $9.1 million. As we wrapped up the 2018-19 fiscal year, we actually had more in reserves than we had anticipated. And so our reserves were at 39.9 million, which is about 10.6% of our expenditures. And then we updated our forecast in the February, early March timeframe, and we then anticipated reserves to only drop by about 2.5 million. As we moved into March, though, we ended up leaving school in the middle of March, and we ended up incurring additional costs and loss of revenue that impacted our district by about 4.5 million. Now we anticipate the reserve reduction to be closer to 6 million, which means going into 2021, we anticipate having 33.9 million to start, which is about 8.9% of expenditures. And our board policy calls for between 5 and 6%. Go ahead, Mike. So entering 2021, we've got revenue flat. We've got enrollment down by about 600 students is what we're forecasting. And the impact of that is about $6 million. We've got COVID-19 costs that are coming in at just over $2 million, or about $100 per student. And then we've got salaries are up $8.5 million. And these were contracts that were previously negotiated, and the pass-through of the cost of living based on IPD from the state, which was at 1.6%. Okay, go ahead, Mike. So we did some things coming into 2021. We did lower staffing, and that's tied to lower enrollment, and so that saved us about $3.2 million. We normally, when we are growing especially, we put in extra staffing contingencies, because as we're growing, we don't know where the pockets of growth are going to hit. And so as we move into fall, if we have a certain grade level or a certain school come in with significantly more students, then we have the money available for us to bring staff on to meet those needs. But when you have shrinking enrollment, you don't really want to build in staffing contingencies, because chances are you're going to shrink more than you anticipated, not necessarily grow more than you anticipated. So we removed all of our staffing contingencies out of that. We reduced our MSOCs, which is materials, supplies, and operating costs, and our supplemental pay, which supplemental pay is overtime, it's substitutes, it's additional days of work. So it's anything above what somebody's contracted pay is for our central and support departments. So that does not impact our schools. It impacts all the departments that are supporting our schools outside of there. And that was about a 7% reduction for those departments. And then we eliminated other contingencies that were in our budget, like for SEB, we had contingencies for benefits that we put in there last year because we were unsure what the impact would be of moving on to the SEB benefits. We had contingencies for substitutes, more outside of teaching ranks, but for classified employees in particular. And then we also had bargaining contingencies in there, which we didn't really need going into next year. So we pulled all of that out, which is about $10.1 million out of expenditures. So go ahead, Mike. Our 2021 budget looks as follows, and these are stated in thousands. So our beginning fund balance is 33.9 million. Revenues we anticipate at 365 million, expenditures at 379 million, leaving us with a net loss of about 14 million, dropping our ending fund balance to just under 20 million, which is 5.3%. It's still within the parameters of what the board policy states, but we need to do some things moving into the next couple of years to make sure it stays there. So again, we cannot afford business as usual. So go ahead, Mike. I did want to touch on what is still in the budget. You know, last year we made some strategic investments really targeted at some of our most impacted students and our students that are the furthest away from educational justice, by adding additional teachers to support, adding some time for teachers to have their PLC communities and to really look at data to support kids, by providing before school enrichment and implementing coordinated student well-being support at our Title I schools, and implementing culturally responsible classroom libraries. Those had impacts on our students that were pretty significant. Well, none of these individually map to these impacts. They all combine to really impact our students and the cultures in those buildings and our student achievement in those buildings. Student climate improved, student attendance improved, discipline data improved and got better, and staff perceived improvements in classroom behavior, student learning, and use of data for PLCs. Unfortunately, last spring we did not take the SBA test, the standardized tests from the state, and so we didn't really get to see the achievement impact for those, but there's a lot of significant improvement in other areas. Go ahead, Mike. We also made some investments at the secondary level. We implemented a support program at Interlake where students could do credit recovery while remaining at their school, working with a teacher and an aide, and it allowed us to keep students on track to graduate. It helped transition students back into school sooner, and it decreased their absenteeism. We implemented our mental health action teams, which are referred to sometimes as MHAT, and we did universal screening, and then we gave support to students that showed a decrease in symptoms and anxiety and depression over the course of the year. And we invested in family engagement, and we exceeded 20% responses to our family satisfaction survey for each of our racial subgroups, which is really approaching our overall response rate of 23%. So again, some pretty significant impacts, and we wanted to make sure that we continued to fund these investments. Go ahead, Mike. The next slide is a required slide by the state to show that we are spending on MSOCs at least what they're allocating us on MSOCs, and we are exceeding what they're allocating us by about 9.2 million. So go ahead, Mike. So what do we need to do over the next 2 years? Well, over the next 2 years, we basically need to reduce spending by 3.5% or $13 million in each of those years. So over the next 2 years, we need to pull 26 million in total out of our current budget, assuming nothing changes in terms of how we are funded. That way, we will get our reserves back above 6% of expenditures by the end of 2022, 2023. Go ahead, Mike. So what do we need to do next? The plan is to start really identifying and analyzing those reductions in September, making recommendations to the board in January, and then implementing those reductions over the next 2 years. I think it's important that we look at this as an overall program across those 2 years and make those decisions based upon impact or academic return on investment for various programs and things. I wanted to make sure that people saw where we spend our money, because you hear different things in terms of where can you find the money at. 66% of our budget goes to teaching and student support, and another 10.4% goes to curriculum and support. And so between those two, we're already at over 3/4 of our budget. And then you get into the maintenance of our buildings, school administration or the school offices. That's another 10%. Now we're up to 86% of our budget. Health and safety is another 4%. So we're at 90% of our budget until you then get to transportation. And district administration is only 2.9% of our budget. So while there are opportunities to save in district administration and nothing is off the table, we are going to have to look throughout our organization. The other thing I want to make clear is that 86% of all of our budgeted expenses are salaries and benefits. And so while I would love to do this without impacting any individuals, I don't think that we can do that, given that we have to find a 7% over 2 years. So we'll begin planning this in September and working with the board as we go through it, and then making recommendations to the board in January so that we have time to get things in place and implemented by the start of 2021. And with that, I'm happy to have questions.
Thanks, Melissa. That is super helpful. I think I hear, is someone chiming in with a question? Erica's got one. Why don't we start there?
Well, I will. Melissa, has there been any discussion or movement at the state level regarding the levy lid and the levy model, especially given the way that COVID has wreaked havoc on all budgets, not just schools, but the state as well? Has there been any movement on that at all to allow districts to sort of like rescue themselves from what is clearly going to be a problem?
No, there has not been. We continue to work with our lobbyists and discuss options on that front, but there has not been any movement at this time.
Should I start?
Yes, please.
Okay. I have maybe a two-part question, Melissa, on federal funding. We've heard kind of intimations of if schools don't go back to full in-person model, there's a threat or a possible threat of losing federal funding. I don't know that you could go through what that would mean here, but I'd like to know two things. One, have you sort of sorted out what that could mean? And two, is the fact that we are essentially making a decision because time requires it, and our Department of Health is giving us essentially the message that it's needed to go remote. If we're doing that without an order from or direction from our governor, has Felipe or others thought about what the implications could be for us for funding at the federal level? I mean, one is a state order, the other one is the threat from federal, but one would think that having that sort of, Ivan, having the governor actually make it official could have value for us in being a little protected against that threat.
True. So first, let me talk about the impact of federal funding. The biggest programs that we have that would be impacted by a loss of federal funding is special education and nutrition services and Title I. So there's three. There's also some other title programs like Title III and others that fall in there, but these are the biggest dollar items. My biggest concern right now is nutrition services. And that is my concern because, so that's from the Department of Agriculture, U.S. Department of Agriculture. And as we get out of the summer feeding or the summer meals program, so the summer meals program is different than the in-school meals program. And the summer meals program is what they put in place last spring for us to be able to deliver food to families outside of being in school. And so we really need to spend some time, and I gave our Director of Nutrition Services a little bit of a heads up to say, let's explore what our options are here for being able to provide meals to students when we aren't in school. Because I don't know that the U.S. Department of Agriculture is going to bring waivers again. So that is a huge concern. We need to reach out to other districts and find out what some of them are doing, because some of the very large districts that are also going 100% remote, like Los Angeles, San Diego, they're all going to be impacted by this as well. And so this goes beyond Bellevue. And we really, all these large districts really need to come together and figure out how we're going to address that. So that's one. With respect to special education, that is not a huge dollar amount. The majority of our special education is paid for by us out of our local levy. But again, it's something to look at that we could have to make up. And then the biggest worry, the other worry that I have is around Title I, because we do fund staff with Title I dollars in our title buildings. And so we're going to have to deal with that if that goes away.
Thanks, Melissa. This is a bit sobering, this whole presentation and all the implications. I would like to ask Francine, who is one of the two board members on our Finance and Operations Committee. She had said earlier she had a couple comments she wanted to make or questions she wanted to ask in this space.
Okay, just waiting for the mic to come on. So the comment I had, and we did this a lot in our Financial and Operations Committee meeting, was to really emphasize that there is alignment of the budget to strategic investments, and also presented in that other report and this report how we're trying to track whether those investments are providing better outcomes for kids. And so I want to just highlight that. The other part of it is, with this strategic investment last year came the notion that we would be cutting almost $10 million from the budget by assessing the programs and finding the ones that weren't effective. As it seemed that the budget was in line, that didn't happen as much, and then COVID hit, and now we see the full ramifications of what's going on. And so that effort is coming up additionally for this year. I do want to say that I think we can do things for this year. This is my personal viewpoint. It's that it is difficult to cut programs. Certainly, it's rarely clear that something is completely ineffective for everyone. Change is hard, and yet really, especially in this coming year, really identifying the programs, either eliminating, scaling back, or adjusting those programs that aren't producing good results for kids, that we need to really match our resources to what our kids need in this changed environment is really critically important. And so I'd like to see, some explicit notes. And it's not a one-for-one, but for example, if we're not having, travel for professional development, that we really are emphasizing that we are doing a lot of training to improve our remote learning, that we are ensuring that all educators are receiving rigorous anti-bias training, that we are figuring out ways to maintain social well-being even at a distance. I think when we think about those strategic investments in that way, it's really important, but it does come at a cost for something else. But I do think that there are definitely opportunities for programs that maybe rely completely on in person, that are on year-to-year contracts, that are areas that we could potentially eliminate even for this coming year. So I know the forecast for this is not for this coming year, but really for another year out. But I do think there are opportunities for this year as well.
Mm-hmm. I agree. There are opportunities to control spending as well. And so we'll be doing more working with our department leads and our schools to talk about controlling spending as we go through the year as well. So remember, this is a budget. This isn't actual spending.
Thanks, Melissa. Carolyn, did you want to chime in on with any questions on this right now?
Well, I don't know if it's so much a question. One of my questions, which I might know the answer to, but do we think that attrition, when we're making cuts, do we think attrition will probably cover it, or I doubt
definitely help. I mean, that would definitely help, right? My goal is to impact, number one, to do the right things for student achievement first and foremost, right? In terms of our kids. Number two, then, is to try and limit the impact on individuals, right? So attrition is one way to do that. I think that's really important to look at. So we have some certificated staff that are not in classrooms right now. It may be important to get them back into classrooms depending upon the different programs that they're working on. So we need to look at all of that as we kind of work through. We need to get kids in school first for September, and then we need to start working on this right away.
So, and my second question, so I'm glad to hear that that's the way we're thinking, because I do worry about, you know, really disrupting people's lives.
Absolutely.
But the other thing I'm worried about is our COVID expenses that we showed were $2 million. And maybe it's pie in the sky, but I am really crossing my fingers and hoping that eventually, sooner, like in the next couple of months, I see in the news about there may be some kind of like $1 a day, cheap, rapid, get the answer in 15, 20, 30 minutes. I mean, it's not just a fantasy. There's numbers of researchers and officials that are talking about this. And I'm just thinking, well, let's see, we've got 22, I mean, that would be perfect, right? Because then we wouldn't have to worry about anything. We just test everybody on the way into the building. But at $1 a test and 22,000 roughly members of our community, that's a $4 million hit. But if that came
every day, or
yeah, no, not 4 million a day, but it would be times 180 days.
Right.
It would be $4 million unless I punched the numbers into my calculator wrong. And so hopefully that would come with some funding. But I just thought I'd put it out there as just something to keep in the back of our minds, that then we might have, as things are discovered, we might have some additional COVID expenses.
Correct.
All right. Thank you for that. I think I want to make sure all the board members' questions on the budget are answered. I find Melissa's work to be very thorough and helpful when she presents this information to us each year, and I really appreciate that we're thinking about COVID. I didn't get a clear sense of how the COVID stuff intersects with this though this year, and I'm wondering, will that be the next version that we see?
Yeah, I do have, and it wasn't in there, but I do have the COVID expenditures at about 2 million. With us going remote in the first part of the year, we're going to have to look at revenue, because there was some anticipated revenue from before and after school care and preschool. So we're going to have to look at those things and see kind of what that looks like as we move into August. So we will be presenting the budget again to you. This is kind of the preliminary first round look. And then as we move into August, we will give you another update on it so that you've got everything that you need in order to vote. So, yeah.
And do we have a community advisory group that is anchored around budget in any way that, on the superintendent's set of advisory committees, or is that something you might form when you put together the plan for how to address these issues?
Yeah, so we do not at this time, but it is something that we need to look at as we start to move forward with these options. I always think that getting community input when you start looking at potential solutions to reductions is important. And so we will do that as part of the overall plan as we start moving forward.
Seema, you got a question?
Yeah, I think Carolyn wants to say something. Maybe she can follow, because I think I know where she's going to go. All right. I wanted to ask if your COVID costs include, I think they do, but the costs relating to busing and transportation, is that already baked in? Meaning, I recall that in a prior meeting.
Yes, so there's additional hours for cleaning. There's electrostat sprayers and cleaners. There's hand sanitizer wipes for the buses. So there's all of those different pieces. It does not include purchasing additional buses.
Yeah.
To meet capacity issues. The big question always is how many people are going to drive their own kids versus how many kids are actually going to ride the bus. So we don't really know if we're going to need additional buses and things like that. So, but it does include time and money for cleaning and disinfecting and those types of things.
As well as the process of getting temperature reads. I think we had talked about that before kids get on the bus, before they walk into the school. All of that is part of that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Melissa, I just wanted to tell you, in case you hadn't heard, you are a communications rock star around this stuff. People just loved during the fall planning meeting when the groups went into their work, but you were online just answering like questions that had come up. People just really loved that, and I've seen that feedback from people I don't even know online, and they're just saying how great that was. And people I do know are saying, can we get her to do like a weekly, update for us? Or they want you to just they want more of you.
Thank you. That is very kind. That is very kind. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, have to agree with Carolyn on that one. Oh, we have another question?
Well, it's just based on something that Melissa just said about additional buses, and perhaps I should have asked this under the annual plan or the return to school planning. But if people at this point want to indicate they want to change something, so maybe they put down, sure, my kid rides the bus to school, when they were answering those questions, and so I checked off one of my kid rides the bus to school. But if the idea is like, well, actually I probably could, I have the capacity to drive them, and that means then the district doesn't need to buy additional buses, that's a different type of question. How do they indicate the change? Do you want just people to do it through Let's Talk, or is there going to be some sort of method to collect information?
We're gonna so my plan is to, in the first communication to people, just to say we are going to provide you with an opportunity to look at what your intent to enroll was and to provide that feedback. And so I would like to see us do that starting on July 28th, which is right after, it's the day after the instructional models come out, and then give them to the end of that week to go ahead and respond. So it would be like another 4 days in there. That way they can look at the instructional models and things like that, and they'll be able to update any information that they want to in that. So the very same programmatic questions, transportation, will you need bus service to support that type of a thing? So that's the goal, is to basically allow them to update and then get that in the system. If they don't respond, we will assume that their initial response is the correct response.
Thank you.
So we're not going to zero out everything, in other words, right? We're just going to let them write over.
That's right. Well, we might want to communicate that even sooner, because people who are listening now or who start discussing the results of this meeting are going to have that question, how do I change if I feel like I need to change?
Right. Well, so it's going to be an initial communication that we're going to reissue on the 28th. So in the very initial communication out to families, it will say that we are planning to reissue this to allow you to change your answers.
Perfect. All right. Are there any additional questions about the budget? Okay, I will just second one of the things that came up. I think it was Francine who brought it up. I would like to see if there's any low-hanging fruit that we'll be able to remove from the expenditures for this year, but I assume that's going to come in August in the updated budget, right? When you have all the line items. Okay, great. Then I will not worry about that. And it sounds like we've got all our questions answered. Board, I'm going to take us off of this topic unless there are any final questions. Oh, there's a and Eva is suggesting we can also get a FAQ up on the website about some of these issues, which is awesome. Thank you.
Can we repeat for the record, because I got people who are listening who aren't clear. We decided during this meeting, or the superintendent decided, that we will be 100% remote to start and we'll reevaluate 6 weeks in. Is that what was decided?
I don't know that the superintendent said quite that specifically. I think what he said is the convergence of health-based information that, including information that he got on a call that went past 4 o'clock today, pushed into this space of the most likely scenario that we're about to do is 100% or not 100%, mostly remote.
My goal was to get a clear answer.
I don't know that we're getting that tonight. Ivan, do you have the details to give such an answer tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the things we have to work in our communication and make sure, because we say 100%, but we're also having conversations around how we can bring some of our students back in a physically distant, safe way. So the terminology is going to be very important in that piece, but it's definitely going into a remote learning situation. And then we have to make decisions around how long that will be, which will be information that we'll be sharing, very soon.
So it will be remote, and we will evaluate in some time frame.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Carolyn's point is a good one, that even though we need some time to get the information out, that now that this has been talked about tonight, everyone's going to start interpreting it and talking about it and telling people what it means to them. And so if we want to tell them what it actually means, we should do that sooner than later. So
and that will be our plan. Yes, we'll try to send something out tomorrow. Yes.
Awesome. Great. All right. So in light of this set of questions, since we've had a huge pivot on things, clearly the entire team needs to spend some time working on all this and moving forward into a more deep set of details on all these pieces to get us going. I know that the board is going to want an update probably before the board meeting on August, is it 4th or 6th, or I've totally lost track of dates, but the first week of August. And I know the staff is going to be crazy busy between now and then. So Superintendent, what is the best way for the board to get details as they're coming forward next week in this plan?
Well, next week we're going to be having a steering committee. Next week we have also implementation team, so we can definitely share, some of that information from the steering committees. And as more information comes out, we can share that with the board as we put the work together. But we're going to definitely need, a couple weeks time in order to get this really baked out in a really good way. But we definitely will share some of this next week.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's going to be important to keep everything out there and informed and moving as you go. That'll be very helpful, and we can touch base on that as it relates to the annual plan on Thursday if the board has additional comments on getting updates. Does anyone have anything they feel like would be useful to share now in terms of what they're looking for in terms of an update prior to the August 5th meeting? All right, that's as much. Oh, go ahead, Erica. Okay, great. Yeah, I think we brought it up in other topics. So I think that just want to call out that something to the board early next week with where we're at on this would be super helpful. Okay. That takes us to a board business item that I think will just take us a minute or two to go through. We have a couple of policies that the Governance, Oversight and Legislative Committee has been working on, and Eileen and I have been meeting with staff on this, including Melanie, including our school EDs, and getting some really great input on how to deal with our monitoring and reporting policies. And these are the things that we're trying to update in those policies to make our communication more effective and better all around for this coming school year. So you can see under the board business item that we're looking to get improved and more clear school-specific planning and reporting expectations, greater alignment with the equity and accountability policy, simplified scoring descriptions, a focus on planning and progress monitoring, not just on board reporting, cleanup of unnecessary overlap between the policies on planning, greater clarity about the output for updates to strategic and other long-term plans, and anything else that's come up. This is just in an open session, an opportunity for other board members to give the governance committee any feedback about things you'd like to see improved about those policies that didn't come up here. There will be a first reading and everything, but because these particular policies are so core to our work, we wanted to give you a chance prior to the first reading to give us input. If these look good, a thumbs up would be helpful. If you want something more or you have no idea, that's fine too. But anything that over the course of the year you have learned from our planning, reporting, and monitoring, because we're right in the midst of annual planning right now. So any feedback is helpful.
Yeah, I am very pleased to see the line about the, it's hard for me to flip back and forth, but mindful as we were doing the equity work that, you know, we committed to monitoring. And I think by having these policies in place, the way you're envisioning, that's going to really help with that and be something we can point to that we actually did around trying to keep our commitments that we're actually monitoring some of the equity work.
Okay, thank you.
So the other piece I would put in just dovetails with the discussion that we had around the budget, which is the way these are written, they're very school based, and that's fine because our programs tend to be in schools, but there are some that are, you know, across the district or maybe need to be assessed with a different lens or outlook. And so, you know, is there room in there somehow to talk about the programs and how they either have the critical criteria assessed or how data is collected on them, how we incorporate stakeholder input, how we make sure that we're listening to the range of voices that may or may not be in the room, who may or may not feel vocally, empowered. And so I think all of those are really key to our equity and accountability policy, and yet making sure that it's applied. It's not explicitly said across these different programs the way we have it currently written. And so if it doesn't rise to the level of being a tier 2 or a tier 1 goal, how do we know that it's being assessed?
I think we've got some work planned on the tier 2, but Francine, I don't think that we had anything worked out on the stakeholder piece, and that's really helpful feedback. Thank you. We will add that to the list. All right, Carolyn, you spoke. Erica gave a thumbs up, and Seema is on the committee. So I think we're good. Anyone have anything else to say about this item? Okay, let me see where we are on the meeting agenda. Got too many documents, sorry. Okay, we're gonna just take a minute to do essential updates. And then we're gonna move to adjourn this formal meeting. So superintendent updates, anything critical there that we should be in the know about?
I think what I shared today was a big update. So I will share the other items which are not as critical in the board update this week.
Thank you. All right, board members, anything that you want to do updates on? The only thing that I have is just let folks know that the goal committee, Seema and I will be meeting with Eileen and our lobbyists and Ivan and our legislators and Melissa on Thursday. So we are continuing our legislative advocacy and really just building relationships and keeping them informed about like how COVID's impacting us and what the implications are to state legislation and state governance. So that's happening as well. Anyone else? Yep.
I'll add in a written report, but basically I think we've covered a lot of the issues that I've been working on, which include the grading for equity, working with Christine and some of the other directors in East King County on a lot of the public health and return to school initiatives. And then also a lot of conversations around equity and how we can use this situation that we're in to actually improve education and equity for our students. So I'll put something in there, but those are the three main buckets of that have been all consuming this summer.
Thank you. Carolyn, it looks like, is your mic off? Are you ready to chime in?
No, I think my mic is on.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I pretty much wrote it and sent it in, so it's on the thing, but my liaisonship to the PTA, you know, they're putting a lot of thought into it, but it is amazing to think about how to do a PTA online when you can't get together in person and provide people support for both the parents and the children, maybe social opportunities, and how do you even like drum up membership and how do you drum up school spirit and all that, but they are working on that. To try to be a supportive resource to our community.
Fantastic. Thanks for calling that out. I think that we sometimes miss out, like there's so many different groups and so many different moving parts to this community that this is impacting all of them. Erica or Seema, do you have anything you want to update with right now?
Mine is mostly in there. I'll just say, Carolyn, I was very interested to see your update about how the PTSA is working on online systems for engagement in general, because that was something that came up in the Eastside Pathways board meeting. I will say for anyone listening, those, not board meeting, but those weekly Tuesday calls are for anyone involved in the community, and anyone can join them and join in the conversation around, I listed out the different groups that are there. And there is some concern that we don't have the right people at the table in those meetings for, you know, the work being done. So please participate if you want to.
Thank you. Erica, you might, I'm sorry, not Erica, Carolyn, you might have just said something, but you wanted.
I just was asking if she had sent the link to that or if it was easily found. For these pathways call, so I could.
Again, I will figure that out.
Oh, thank you.
That would be great. Or if I could just have Jen resend it, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so we've got that. And I think I'm trying to keep everything here moving. I think that is everything on tonight's agenda. And as I end, I just want to recognize and thank Carolyn. Just really called out for me the extent to which our community is just immersed in and trying to find ways to support our school community during this crazy, crazy time. And Erica's calling out the same thing with the work that Eastside Pathways is doing. And Carolyn has one more to chime in on.
Could we hear from Seema about the housing insecurity, or is there no time?
Oh, I did. Did I miss that?
No, it's my fault because I said no. So I mean, I wanted to make sure that we were staying on time. So I updated you guys last time, and you heard from, you know, the Bellevue Schools Foundation. They deserve and continue to need support and deserve a great shout out. Same with Jubilee Reach. I just don't have anything material to give you there in terms of net new information. The only thing I'll say in 30 seconds or a minute is that we should all keep our eye on the moratorium that's in place for evictions that is set to expire on August 1st. And I hope we can each do our part to push the tide towards having that extended, because we have real need in King County, but as many know, there's a misunderstanding as to needs on the east side. We have a lot of people who are suffering from housing insecurity, you know, literally at risk of losing their current home at any moment. And many of them are families and schools in our community. So we are leaning on some great teams within the school district who are reaching out and learning what those needs are, trying to do our best to support them. They all deserve great kudos. Shamari's extended team has been well invested in this, but it's just to know when people ask you, how is this impacting our community? You've heard about food insecurity. You should know that housing insecurity is high, and we're working hard to try to help, but there's a lot of limited options and we need more. So having that moratorium extended would be one. And so we have to figure out what happens if that is not the case. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is That is very apropos for this time. Francine, did you have something that you want to jump in with?
Well, I think I could just echo something Carolyn said earlier to make it clear that even as we go ahead with this, sounds like primarily remote learning to start the fall with, I know there'll be lots of people who are incredibly disappointed, and yet that, and a lot of the directors here today expressed support of this model because it allows the focus on making sure that we are providing the best educational model within those circumstances ahead of being forced to be closed and then caught unready, and allows those creative options to try to bring students in and mitigate the negative parts of complete remote learning that impacted many students. And so I think just wanted to emphasize that as that we understand people are disappointed, and yet being prepared and being able to take action and being able to support our students, our families, educators to make this happen is incredibly important. So we do realize that people will be disappointed, but being able to act on a plan will support our students.
Well said. Thank you for that. So again, many thanks. The staff who have been working to put together these plans, the community members who've been part of these planning groups, these steering committees, all the efforts, the community organizations who are trying to help us figure out ways to support our kids creatively, the PTSAs, the advocacy groups. Like there's no one in our city who doesn't support us in some way. And I have to also point out that the budget, we would not have the buildings we have if it weren't for our community support to invest in those buildings, because we don't get adequate funds from the state for buildings, and we also in facilities, and we really could not be in the position we're in with some kind of financial reserve. Even though we're eating away at it, we're still surviving right now, and that is because of our community's generosity. We could not do that without them. So just so much gratitude for the collective effort. And thank you to the superintendent, his team, and the teachers, all the staff in all spaces who are working to support this. Thank you to everyone. And I think that brings us to adjournment. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you.